Kilifi, Mombasa, and makwiny, and has submitted a report to the Senate highlighting experiences from the county governments and making recommendations on the same. Honorable Senators, in my considered opinion, this report is not an ordinary report on financial statements and operations of county governments. And in this respect, I therefore refer the report to the Standing Committee on Finance and Budget, working together with the Standing Committee on Justice, Legal Affairs and Human Rights to scrutinize its contents and make observations and recommendations thereon by way of a report submitted to the Senate for consideration and adoption. The committees are required to identify gaps in the public participation processes highlighted by the Auditor General and to come up with legislative interventions that will standardize procedures across the 47 county governments. Appreciating that the budget cycle for the next financial year is already ongoing, I urge the standing committees to expeditiously consider the report and to submit their recommendation within the next 60 days for consideration by the Senate. Thank you. Next order.
Order number 6, notices of motion. Order number 7, statements.
The Senator for West Pokot. Okay. The Honorable Senator for West Pokot.
Mr. Speaker, I rise pursuant to Standing Order 53-1 to seek a statement from the Standing Committee on Labor and Social Affairs on the establishment and management of sports training academies in counties. In the statement, the committee should, number 1, provide a detailed status report on the measures the Kenya Academy of Sports has taken to establish and maintain sports training academies in counties, following its establishment by Section 33 of the Sports Act, and to comply with Article 6.3 of the Constitution that requires a national stage organ to ensure reasonable access to its services in all parts of the country. And number 2, outline the structures that the Kenya Academy of Sports has established to aid in scouting, development, and promotion of talent in sports in counties. Mr. Speaker, I don't know whether I can make a 1-point comment, 2 minutes or 1 minute, sir.
Honorable Senator, you know very well that you cannot explain your statement, neither can you debate your statement. You read it as you submitted and approved by the Speaker. Thank you, Senator. Edwin Sifuna, what say you?
Just given your direction, Mr. Speaker, I don't know if I should proceed. I wanted to add one word on this.
That you can.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am very happy that this particular statement is being sought. Mr. Speaker, I am personally very passionate about sports and sporting facilities, especially here in the city where we have a lot of talents. So I'll be looking forward to this statement, Mr. Speaker. It continues to break my heart, Mr. Speaker, that we do not take sports seriously. We have even an ongoing problem, and this is an issue I've spoken to on this floor, that there is absolutely no support for the national teams, Mr. Speaker. Just this morning, I was being informed that the rugby national team, the women rugby team, the Lionesses, are supposed to be going for the Dubai Sevens, Mr. Speaker. They are unable to even afford tickets. There is absolutely no support from government. There is no word from the CS for sports. And yet we had this sports fund here that was supposed to be able to sort out some of these things, Mr. Speaker. So I would encourage the Committee on Labor to give this particular matter the seriousness it deserves. Once we know the status of all this, the sports fund and the the facilities in the counties and especially in Nairobi, Mr. Speaker, we can then take it up from there. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Chiranke.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for this opportunity. One quick comment is I want to thank Senator Katuri Murungi for this statement. Mr. Speaker, where I come from, 99% in Nandi County, we are called the source of champions, depend on sports. Mr. Speaker, if you kill sports, you kill our youth in my county. We had what we call sports fund. At some point, it was diverted during the last regime to fund. And then we were being told to fund petroleum development levy fund as a subsidy, Mr. Speaker. I think it is the right time. I saw the CS Ababu Namwamba meeting with various federations. Mr. Speaker, the problem is with federations. Federations must do elections, Mr. Speaker. There are federations that have taken 10 years to do elections. And therefore, it means there is nothing innovative that they are bringing on the table, Mr. Speaker. Even, Mr. Speaker, as the World Cup is ongoing in Qatar, we are just remaining as spectators, Mr. Speaker, because the problem starts with management and governance of sports in this country, Mr. Speaker. And from the look of things, if we don't work hard, the only time that the Kenyan football will appear in an international stage might be when during the second coming of Jesus Christ, Mr. Speaker. So we must agree, Mr. Speaker, that if we have to get a better future, we must invest in talent, innovation, in investment, in protection, Mr. Speaker. The second point, Mr. Speaker, you saw 2 weeks ago, and I brought a statement where the issue of doping, especially in both athletics and other sectors, Mr. Speaker. This is one of the soft underbelly that will kill the careers of most of the youthful people in as much as talent is concerned, Mr. Speaker. The anti-doping agency released 22 names. They are saying they are going to release more 26 names. These are young people who are barely 21, 22 years. Their lives are now in jeopardy because allegedly they have been caught with the abuse of drugs, Mr. Speaker, by the ADAC. Mr. Speaker, I'm requesting the following, even as you add on the development of talent. One, that let us not only ban the athletes or the sportsmen and women. Let us also go for the coaches, the trainers, the training camp. Mr. Speaker, this is the country where somebody, a tourist, using a tourism visa, lands at JKIA, goes to somewhere in Kaptagat or Nandils, and starts training athletes using tourism visa. And we find it okay in this country, Mr. Speaker. Yet there is an immigration department. Mr. Speaker, I think we must stop this. Like here in Nairobi City County, just like any other counties, there is so much talent. It is for us to identify, work towards it. We have a law that, and Mr. Speaker, Kenyans should know that we have a fund called Sports Fund. And the President has promised that that fund will be ring-fenced. Let that fund be used to identify. And if we can use that sports fund to identify the talent, I can assure you, in the next, Mr. Speaker, because I saw jokingly, in the next 2026 World Cup, where it will be held in Mombasa and Machakos, Kenya might likely feature in the World Cup that is on camp, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, I'll be happy to join my brother, Senator Katuri Murungi, on this matter together with Senator Sifuna and other colleagues to try and ensure, Mr. Speaker, that the sports works for us. We depend entirely on it. The economy, Mr. Speaker, in Eldoret City County, the economy in Kapsabet town, Mr. Speaker, is, Mr. Speaker, even in Iten, is sustained by the money that comes from sports. If we protect sports, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you the entire of North Rift, including my county, will continue to prosper if we can invest so much in sports, Mr. Speaker. With those very many remarks and comments, Mr. Speaker, I hope the Committee on Sports, Welfare will handle this matter with the agency it deserves. Let us give opportunity to our young people to thrive. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Crystal Lesiga.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me to also add to this statement. I also just wanted to add that sports should be seen from the lens of persons with disabilities as well. I wish to inform the House and Kenyans that are listening that people with disabilities are very talented in many ways, including sports. And right now, the Sports Fund isn't really supporting persons with disabilities in different fields and disciplines in the sporting world in Kenya. Mr. Speaker, currently, on the 3rd of December, there is the Kenya Sports Federation of the Visually Impaired that are having trials in preparation for next year's games in Birmingham, which, of course, as you will know, is the prerequisite for the Paris Olympics and Paralympics in 2024. And right now, they don't have any funding at all, zero. We are, I'll say, because I'm in that same association, we are funding amongst ourselves, getting no help from government at all. And we're the people that are going to, hopefully, go to these world stages and represent Kenya as a whole. Mr. Speaker, sports isn't just for the non-disabled, it's also for people with disabilities to showcase their talent, but also as an escape, Mr. Speaker. I personally am a swimmer. From Mombasa County, I used to swim when I was in high school when I still had my vision, and I continue swimming because when I swim, Mr. Speaker, I forget that I'm blind. In the water, when I am just myself and no noise, no obstacles in my way, when I swim, I feel absolutely free. And that is the same sentiment that many people with disabilities go through. It's a way for us to express ourselves and to escape the barriers that we have to face in the built environment. And so I wish that everyone that's listening to this statement specifically to consider sports for the disabled as well. I thank you.
Senator Ekomwa James Lomenen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to support the statement by the Deputy Speaker. Mine, Mr. Speaker, is just to inform the committee which is concerned in sports that in the county that I come from, there are people with very excellent talents called warriors, and we have made them to go to the church and reform themselves from killing people, raiding livestock, and killing women in the highway. So instead of running fast with the cattle and the camels, we have decided to urge the government, especially the Minister of Sports, these people to be included in athletics. They will be very fast, running with 100 meters. And we will have gold, many golds in this nation, instead of them running with livestock. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, moreover, it is also a concern that most of these people are marginalized. They do not even know what is happening in the nation. They don't know whether sport is there. They don't know where people provide the athletics, sports. They're only busy in adding. It is higher time for this House, Mr. Speaker, to educate, to take time in this participation to educate these people with what are the right things to do in a day. Because, like now the county of Turkana, for example, they can scheme, they can plan for sports annually, or quarterly, so that we encourage these people to come and participate in sport, in athletics. I'm very sure, Mr. Speaker, we will have wonderful people and we will reduce the issue of killings and rapings in highway. Mr. Speaker, I urge and I request the Department of the Committee of Sports to consider the reformed warriors and be part of the people who are supposed to assist this nation in athletics. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, I can also inform Senator Cherengei. There are people for Turkana County youth who are very good at athletics, but their names have been changed from Turkana names to Nandi. There is the one called Erupe. Instead of being called Erupe, they call Choriot. I don't know, Mr. Speaker, how do you indulge for such issues? It is not a point of order, but it is a point of information to know that these talents that we are tapping, we must have specific talents in a specific area. Yes, so that we don't commit a fallacy of generalization. Anybody who knows running in Kenya are being said that they come from Nandi, they come from Elgeyo. No, not everybody who knows running comes from Elgeyo. They should also come from Garissa, Nyandarua. So, Mr. Speaker, that is a point of information.
Senator Boni.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the issue of sports, just to echo what the Senator from Nairobi said, is something which is a major industry, an industry that offers very high-paying jobs all over the world. I request the committee to take a holistic approach to this problem. For example, you need to speak to the Ministry of Education and see how the education system is going to be tweaked so that children have time for sports. At the moment, children have only time for studying and preparing for exams. Mr. Speaker, if this is addressed, then the centers that were serving as football academies in this country will be revived. Musingu High School of the Scorpions, Kakamega High School of the Green Commandos, Iterio Boys in Kisii, Mr. Speaker, Kisumu High School, and Mombasa High School, and finally Upper Hill High School. We need to address this. We are missing out in the process of wanting to train for the usual professionals. We are losing out on professionals in sports, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is important that we alert Senator Cherengei that human trafficking is punishable under our penal code. So if it is true that we have trafficked young people from Turkana to Nandi, and you're calling them
Senator,
Mr. Speaker, sir, I'm sorry to address him. I started feeling that I was addressing a criminal. He's not a criminal, and he could easily hit me from the back. That's why I was looking at him. So, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, it's important that we free our children. Talent is gotten from the youth. Talent is gotten from the youth. We constructed a makeshift stadium in Marinya, and thanks to that stadium, children are emerging from that little stadium to join football clubs here in Nairobi. It shows what can happen if we put facilities in our regions so that our children can get access to these high-paying jobs, Mr. Speaker.
That statement is referred to the relevant committee for consideration. The Honorable Senator Crystal Asige.
Mr. Speaker, I rise pursuant to Standing Order 53-1 to seek a statement from the Standing Committee on Health regarding the Ministry of Health Strategic Plan 2018 to 2023, specifically regarding persons with disabilities. In the statement, the committee should, 1, give a detailed report on the county general hospitals, sub-county hospitals, health facilities, and dispensaries that have been made fully accessible with universally designed features and infrastructure since the adoption of the Ministry of the Health Strategic Plan. These features and infrastructures include, but are not limited to, accessible hospital beds, disabled toilets, showers, and hot baths, adequate handlebars and grab rails, well-maintained lifts, slip-resistant flooring, step-free access, and so on. 2, give a detailed report on the provision made for mobility aids, assistive devices, and sign language interpretation in these health facilities since adopting the Ministry of Health Strategic Plan. These are imperative to delivery of quality healthcare and quality healthcare to persons with disabilities when communicating. 3, state what disability training health workers have been receiving since the adoption of the strategic plan, detailing how often these trainings take place. Excuse me. 4, state what percentage of health workers within the Ministry of Health are persons with disabilities, as provided for in Article 54(2) of our Constitution. Recognizing that health workers with disabilities are best placed to understand the needs of people with disabilities and identify gaps in service delivery when they occur. And 5, state how many health facilities have established stand-alone PWD desks that offer inclusive and quality services to persons with disabilities. Where PWD desks have been established, what needs assessments do they carry out that are specific to the diverse types of disabilities, their varying degrees, and how to properly handle these conditions? Further, stating how often said assessments are carried out. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Cheruiyot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a comment on this statement by Senator Crystal. Senator Crystal continues to distinguish herself as an indefatigable defender of persons living with disability or ably gifted persons, Mr. Speaker. And we must continue to commend her, support her as her colleagues, and join her as partners to see persons gifted differently, Mr. Speaker, enjoy their rights as enshrined in Article 54(2) of our Constitution. The Constitution expects of us, Mr. Speaker, to enact legislation and to pursue continuously until such a time as when those persons will be at least 5% of all elective and appointive bodies in the country, Mr. Speaker. Because, and I don't have the statistics right, I may need to check later, Mr. Speaker, I believe that the population of persons living with disability as a percentage of the entire population is actually higher than that 5%, Mr. Speaker. And it's good, I think Senator Matinga says it's 11%. Therefore, even 5% is just to demand half of what is their rightful share, Mr. Speaker. The statement that she has brought this afternoon is something that I will follow with keen interest when the Committee on Health returns a report before this House, Mr. Speaker, because it will be important to know, you know, hospital and the facility, health care facilities are facilities that are used by all of us. And we must continue to push and demand from the executive and from our county governments, from institutions such as Parliament and all public institutions, that they continue to be PWD compliant in their trainings, in the facilities that are available, and wholesomely as an institution, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, this is a very progressive statement, and we must commend her and support her. Finally, Mr. Speaker, at the end of last term, before this House adjourned sine die, I had sponsored a bill jointly together with Senator Isaac Mwaura that was meant to actually help persons living with disability enjoy all their constitutional rights. And we had cleaned up the various legislations that exist in the country to ensure that we progressively work towards achieving this constitutional target. Unfortunately, with the lapse of that House of Parliament, that bill also lapsed. I want to encourage Senator Crystal to perhaps maybe get a copy of that particular bill, jointly with other legislations perhaps that you might already be working on, and many of us, myself included, will be glad to complete that journey so that in the next few months we are able to secure some of these rights by way of legislation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable Senator Osotsi.
Mr. Speaker, if you can allow me maybe to say something on the statement by the Deputy Speaker regarding sports academies.
Honorable Osotsi, you may kindly yield and take your seat, please. The Honorable Matinga.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, sir. I like also to support the statement by Senator. And I would want to say that, Mr. Speaker, sir, we should not only stop short of ensuring that the health facilities are accommodative of the people who are living with disability. We should go a step further, Mr. Speaker, sir, and start having a candid conversation of mainstreaming people living with disability into the main schools. Mr. Speaker, sir, we know that the society we live in today, they are highly stereotyped. And this has been caused by the fact that we have treated people who are who have been otherwise living with a disability with a kind of an attitude that is born from the fact that we do not know how to treat them right from the word go. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, so it would be important if we go ahead and mainstream people living with disability in the main schools so that our kids will learn how to deal with them, will learn how to handle them, and they do not need to feel like other people, that they're different from others when these people get to know how to live with them. I therefore support the statement, and I think, as has been said by the majority leader, it is a work that we as a nation must work to ensure that even people who are living with disabilities feel like part and parcel of this nation as enshrined in our Constitution. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Honorable Senator Mazayo. Don't worry.
Asante Bwana Spika. Bwana Spika, kwanza nataka kupatia kongole dada yetu Kristo kwa taarifa hii ya walemavu. Bwana Spika, walemavu wako katika aina mbalimbali. Spika, utaona ya kwamba kuna walemavu wa macho hawawezi kuona kama dada yetu, na kuna wale walemavu ambao hawawezi kutembea, kuna walemavu ambao hawawezi kusikia, na hali kadhalika walemavu wa aina mbalimbali. Bwana Spika, ni muhimu sana kuona ya kwamba katika mahospitali yetu tumeweza kuweka mikakati ya kutosha kuona ya kwamba kama zile njia ambazo zinapitiwa na walemavu. Bwana Spika, nimewahi kuwa katika hospitali yetu ya Kilifi. Sijaona kama kumepangwa mikakati mizuri ndani ya hospitali kuona ya kwamba walemavu wanaweza kupita katika zile njia kwa hali ya kwamba hawawezi kupata tabu. Katika ile, kama unaenda katika upande wa ngazi, kuna sehemu fulani kuna walemavu wengine wanakuja wakiwa na magari ya kutembeza na mkono. Tunaona mara nyingi kama kuna ngazi za kupanda, yule mlemavu anakuwa na shida na ni lazima apate matibabu. Anaenda kumuona daktari akiwa amebebwa na watu, hali alikuwa amekuja na gari, na ile gari yake inachukuliwa inapandishwa kwa ngazi alafu ndio wanapelekwa kwa daktari. Bwana Spika, ni jambo la muhimu kuona kwamba tutaweza kuweka mkazo na kuona kwamba kamati ambayo itashughulika na hii izingatie kwa wale watu ambao ni walemavu, hususan hata pia tukiona kwamba kuna wale watu ambao wanatafsiri, wako wanaoweza kutafsiri kwa njia ya kuongea na mikono, kuna wale wanaweza kutafsiri kwa kuongea, na hao pia wapewe nafasi. Utaona katika michezo pia waweze kushughulishwa katika stadium zile ambazo tuko nazo, ziweze kutengezwa kwa njia ya hali ya kwamba inaweza pia ikaona ikaangalia ikaweka macho yake kwa kikamilifu kwa vile wale watu walemavu wanaweza kutumia nafasi hizo. Asante Bwana Spika.
We'll move to the next statement. Honorable Senator Khalwale. Yes. Zile za Maruma peke yake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise pursuant to Standing Order number 53-1 to seek for a statement from the Standing Committee on Health on the construction status of health facilities in informal settlements in Nairobi City County. In the statement, the committee should list the health facilities that were being constructed or rehabilitated in informal settlements in Nairobi City County in the last 2 financial years. And 2, provide the status reports on the completion and operationalization of each of those health facilities, indicating the respective costs of construction or rehabilitation. Mr. Speaker, on the same standing order, I wish to seek for a statement from the Standing Committee on Roads, Transport and Housing on the status of operation of the Green Park terminus and the upgrade of the Uhuru Park and Central Park areas in Nairobi City County. In the statement, Mr. Speaker, I would like that we establish the cause of the delay in the operationalization of the Green Park terminus that was set to commence in May 2022 in Nairobi City County. And 2, explain the reasons for the non-completion of the upgrade of the project for Uhuru Park and Central Park that commenced in September 2021, and state the budgeted cost of the project and indicate the amount spent on the project so far. And finally, state when the bus terminus will be operationalized and the park project completed. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I rise also on the same standing order to seek for a statement from the Standing Committee on Finance and Budget on the status of the 16 billion pending bills that were incurred by the Nairobi Metropolitan Services in the last 2 years. In the statement, Mr. Speaker, the committee should provide a comprehensive report on the pending bills accumulated in Nairobi City County in the last 2 years, indicating the amount owed to the respective service providers and the financial year in which the pending bills were incurred. 2, Mr. Speaker, the committee should state whether the Nairobi Metropolitan Services adhered to the procurement law in procuring the goods and services, providing details of whether the projects were tendered for and who won and what were the awarded tenders. And finally, indicate the plans, if any, put in place by the Nairobi City County government to ensure that all contractors owed money by the county are paid before the end of the current financial year. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Those three statements are so referred to the relevant committees. Senator Chiranke, what's your statement?
Mr. Speaker, I wanted to comment on the last statement.
What is your statement, Senator?
Oh, okay.
Make your request
thank you.
for statement.
Okay. Request for statement, Mr. Speaker, on the planned importation of maize by the ministry, on the planned importation of duty-free maize, 10 million bucks by the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock Development. Mr. Speaker, sir, I raise pursuant to Standing Order 53-1 to seek a statement from the Standing Committee on Agriculture, Livestock and Fisheries on the planned importation of 10 million bags of duty-free maize by the Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock and Development, and also Ministry of Trade. In the statement, the committee should, 1, explain what informed the decision by the Ministry of Agriculture and Trade, Livestock Development to import maize, and yet the National Cereals and Produce Board has not opened its stores to take up the crop currently being harvested by local farmers across the country, considering the high cost of farm inputs, where one bag of fertilizer was 7,000 shillings, they incurred, among other costs, during the planting season. Mr. Speaker, sir, number 2, appraise the Senate on the status of the government subsidized fertilizer in terms of uptake by farmers so far and the amount of fertilizer currently available in stores countrywide, and indicate the steps the government is taking to enhance uptake and ensure local farmers produce sufficient maize and obviate the need for importation of maize outside the country. And Mr. Speaker, finally, recommend that the Cabinet Secretary for Trade, Investment and Industry does not gazette the notice allowing duty-free maize importation from outside the country until the entire crop being harvested currently is purchased by National Cereals and Produce Board, local millers, and National Strategic Grain Reserve. Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for that indulgence.
The Honorable Senator Kamara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me an opportunity to thank the Senator of Nandi, Senator Gerard Gay, for a statement on the maize importation. Mr. Speaker, it is sad that we are back to the same cycle that we were in 3 years ago when I and the current Speaker of the National Assembly had to investigate the very same thing of importation of maize when maize was being harvested. Mr. Speaker, luckily, God has saved us the productivity in the grain growing zone this time again, and there's pamba harvest in Trans Nzoia, there's pamba harvest in Bungoma, there's pamba harvest in Nandi, there's pamba harvest in Uasin Gishu, and Elgeyo Marakwet, the islands of Elgeyo Marakwet. So you ask yourself the big question, the harvesting is going on right now. In fact, we find a lot of lorries now ferrying maize from Uasin Gishu to other places. So you ask yourself, what really informed the decision to import maize now? Because, yes, the maize may not be enough because most parts of the country were dry. We did not get as much as we would have gotten under normal circumstances in Meru and wherever. So, Mr. Speaker, as I support this statement, we would really like the committee to also relook at the report that we developed after our investigation of maize. Because what we realized at that time is that some of the approvals were overshot by more than double. An approval is given by the cabinet for importation of maize to a certain tune, and we discovered they had imported more than double. So even as they question that, they need to look at the report that came from our earlier report, because it was a report of this House, so that we make sure that we don't suffer double jeopardy. But, Mr. Speaker, I can assure you that the harvest in North Rift is very good, and we should not, in fact, be having problems. Yesterday only, we talked to the Minister for Education, and we said, you have enough maize not to have children at home, because children from Kajiado, children from Northern Kenya are at home, basically because there is no food. So it is good that as a House, we really put our foot down. The other thing we really need to look at is how is the role of the governors in this, because agriculture is devolved except for policy. What are the governors doing? Why are we not seeing governors frantically looking for food in some of these areas? So even as we are questioning the importation, we really need to start questioning the distribution of food in this country, from the growing zone to the consumption zones, because the country will continue to be like that for a very long time, especially with climate change setting in and having problems. So, Mr. Speaker, thank you for giving me the opportunity. I stand with the statement of Senator Cherargei. We cannot afford to import maize at a time when harvesting is taking place. They can do importation any other time when we know we don't have. But now that we have, I would like to urge the Minister for Trade to avoid mixing things and allow the Ministry of Agriculture to open the depots first, so that farmers can release their maize before any importation is done. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Mandago.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for the opportunity. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support the statement by Senator Cherargei, the Senator for Nandi, on the issue of importation of maize, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think the Cabinet Secretary for Trade has been misled by cartels who have existed in this country for a while, Mr. Speaker, that farmers in maize-producing counties, Mr. Speaker, are hoarding maize at the expense of Kenyans who are suffering from hunger, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the farmers are not hoarding maize. In fact, we are in a season of harvesting, Mr. Speaker, and as the maize is being harvested, it is being sold to traders who are distributing across the country, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as we speak, there are traders from Kitui, there are traders from Isiolo, there are traders from Marsabit and Samburu buying maize to take to those famine-stricken counties, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the importation of maize that is sanctioned during harvest, Mr. Speaker, is meant to impoverish the farmers who have already suffered major losses, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Cabinet Secretary must be reminded that the situation we are facing of low productivity is as a result of bad politics, Mr. Speaker, in the agriculture sector, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as we may recall, the farmers in this country were not given any subsidized fertilizer, Mr. Speaker, to enable them produce food at an affordable cost, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, therefore, it cannot be expected that the farmers are going to sell their produce at a lower price when the cost of production, Mr. Speaker, was very high. Mr. Speaker, it is unfortunate it's meant to incite the farmers against other citizens of this country, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that importation must be stopped or deferred until the maize in the country, Mr. Speaker, is mopped up. Mr. Speaker, I don't understand the rationale of importation of maize. I've checked the prices globally, Mr. Speaker, and even the so-called GMO maize, Mr. Speaker, will land in Mombasa at a cost of 5,200 by a 90 kg bag of maize. If you add the logistical support required to transport that maize and avail in the areas that is required, Mr. Speaker, the price will go to 5,800. Mr. Speaker, our farmers would be very happy in this country if the National Cereals and Produce Board even opened those stores at a cost of 5,500 per bag, Mr. Speaker. I can tell you farmers will be ready to deliver their maize. In any case, the farm price, the farm gate price we are selling our maize now, Mr. Speaker, is between 4,800 to 5,300, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, there is need to support farmers in this country. Worldwide, Mr. Speaker, farmers are given subsidies to produce because farming in itself cannot be profitable and affordable, and the cost of food cannot be affordable without giving subsidies to the farmers. Mr. Speaker, I would also like the committee to find out what happened with the strategic food reserves that we used to have in this country? Who changed the policy from storing food in the stores to keeping money in the accounts, Mr. Speaker? And that is why we found ourselves in a sorry situation, because all the NCBB stores are empty, because a bad policy was put in place that has messed up the strategic food reserves in this country. And that is why government cannot effectively and efficiently respond when we have issues within a number of counties. And Mr. Speaker, it should be noted that in more than 36 counties in this country, we have NCBB stores, Mr. Speaker. If you visit those stores today, Mr. Speaker, those stores are empty. And we are not saying the strategic food reserves that should be kept in this country is only maize, Mr. Speaker. What is happening with the rice from where, Mr. Speaker, that is supposed to be part of the strategic food reserves? Where is the rice going, Mr. Speaker? Where is the maize going, Mr. Speaker? Where is the sorghum that was being grown in the semi-arid counties, Mr. Speaker, being sold at? We need to revert and go back to storing food for emergency situations in this country. We cannot keep money in account or give money to organizations like Kenya National Trading Corporation to keep money to buy food when we have a situation like this. Suppose we don't find the food in the market, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, countries all over the world are now using technology to monitor their food situation, to monitor the weather patterns. Suppose the weather patterns globally cannot allow for food production. The countries we are expecting to import the food from, Mr. Speaker, can also keep the food for their own citizens, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, it is in the interest of this country that we keep our own strategic food reserves in the stores that have been built and were purposely meant for that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I therefore rise to support this statement, and the committee should consider asking the Cabinet Secretary to defer importation of maize until all the maize produced locally in this country have been mopped up and sold. And secondly, Mr. Speaker, they should, as a pledge of this government, Mr. Speaker, going into the future and beginning in the next production cycle, Mr. Speaker, provide a guaranteed minimum return for the maize farmer, so that as farmers, we can determine whether we are going to go back to the farms to do maize, to do food for this country, or decide whether we are going to do other commercial production, Mr. Speaker, so that we also, as farmers, are also able to meet our subsistence needs, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, food production or maize production should not be taken as a hobby, Mr. Speaker. We do maize production as a business. That is where we get our school fees. That is where we get our money to go to hospitals. And we therefore don't want to be impoverished by business people who want to take advantage of a bad situation in the country, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support this statement. Thank you.
Senator Mazaya.
Asante Bwana Spika. Bwana Spika, nataka kumpa kongole ndugu yangu Cherargei, seneta mchapakazi wa Nandi. Bwana Spika, kama ingekuwa hii nchi haina mahindi, sijui watu wangeishi namna gani. Kwa sababu ukiangalia 90% ya Wakenya wanategemea mahindi. Katika Kenya utaona ya kwamba, Bwana Spika, hakuna nyumba yoyote ambayo hawatumii mahindi. Kwa hiyo ni jambo la kusikitisha sana kuona ya kwamba katika hii nchi ambao sisi tunasema ukulima ndio uti wa mgongo, yako maeneo fulani ambayo yanaweka chakula mpaka tunaita kama food basket, yani mfuko wa chakula cha watu wa Kenya. Ukienda katika bonde la Ufa, kule kuna wakulima wa mashamba makubwa. Hata ukija pengine maeneo ya pwani, kuna wakulima fulani katika masehemu fulani ambao wao pia wanaweza wanafanya mambo ya ukulima wa mahindi. Na hilo ndio tegemeo la Mkenya. Hivi leo ikiwa tunaweza kuambiwa ama tunaweza kuona hata kwa taarifa ya magazeti ya kwamba kuna magunia milioni 10 ya mahindi ambayo yanangoja kushushwa ili Wakenya waweze kutumia hayo mahindi hayo, tunauliza kitu kimoja. Hawa wakulima wetu ambao tunasema ukulima ni uti wa mgongo, hawa wakulima wetu, je, sisi kama Wakenya tumewaweka wapi? Hilo ndio swali muhimu sana la kujiuliza, kwa sababu tunaweza kuleta mahindi iaje hapa na tutakuwa tumeua nguvu za mkulima ambaye analima mahindi. Kwa hiyo Bwana Spika, naona taarifa hii ambayo imeletwa na Cherargei hapa ndani imekuwa ni taarifa ya muhimu sana, na ni jambo la kusisitiza kwamba kamati kama hii itakayokuwa imepewa nafasi ya kuchunguza jambo kama hili, kamati ya ukulima, iweze kuita waziri, iweze kuita wale watu ambao waliweza kuimport, manake hii imefanywa na watu mabiashara, kama walipewa contract na nani, kama ilikuwa namna gani mpaka wakaleta hizo milioni 10 za hayo magunia ya mahindi, ili waje hapa tuwaulize maswali kama kulikuwa kuna ukosefu, kama kulikuwa kuna hii tenda ilitangazwa ama haikutangazwa, iko namna gani ama ilikuwa vipi, ili tuweze kujua na Wakenya wote waweze kujua. Asante Bwana Speaker.
Honorable Senators, you will notice that the statement hour is long spent, and therefore for those statements that we have not managed to call them out, they stand deferred to tomorrow. Next order, Clerk.
Order number 8, motion, state of food security in Kenya.
Honorable Senators, we shall resume debate that was interrupted yesterday, Tuesday. And before debate was interrupted, the Honorable Senator Ledama was making his contribution. I'm not seeing the senator here. I guess he's in Juba. And therefore, any senator wishing to contribute, kindly you may key in so that we proceed with debate. Honorable Osotsi Geoffrey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity to contribute to this debate. This debate on food security by my good friend Senator Mofaya, the Senator of the Rakanithi. Mr. Speaker, Honorable Cherargei has just brought a statement here regarding the issue of importation of food. And as you are aware, importation of food is caused by scarcity of the product that we have in this country. So I think this motion is very timely, and the recommendations are also very timely in terms of having a well-coordinated strategic grain reserve across the country. I think this aspect of having a strategic grain reserve, it is a matter that the government must give a lot of focus and emphasis because it appears that policies around that and even plans around having a strategic grain reserve have over the years appeared to be not adhered to. So we expect that this government will ensure that we have a well-coordinated and managed strategic grain reserve, especially for staple food items like maize, beans, and other kind of foods that Kenyans eat, like rice. He has also proposed that we need to develop livestock feeding programs in arid and semi-arid areas. Mr. Speaker, you have seen so many animals dying in those areas because of drought. And the farmers have had to bear huge losses because of death of animals in Turkana, in places like northeastern, eastern part of the country. And those are huge losses to the country, which the government could manage by providing foodstuffs to these livestock, so that we have good quality livestock in this country. Mr. Speaker, he has also proposed that the National Drought Management Authority to be doing quarterly report. I think, Mr. Speaker, this authority is not doing its work very well. Because if they were doing their work very well, they would be able to monitor drought situation in the country, advise the government in time, so that we don't have to be running up and down when we have drought situation like the moment. We are able to plan well in advance for our people. Mr. Speaker, the issue of subsidized agriculture production, I fully support it. We need to subsidize our agriculture. We need to invest in agriculture. And our budget for agriculture is very low, Mr. Speaker. And yet agriculture is a key economic activity. I think we need to think about putting more money in agriculture, putting more money in subsidies, so that our farmers produce more food for our people. He has also talked about establishing abattoirs in ASAL countries. I think it's important, Mr. Speaker, so that we can manage the issue of marketing and selling of animals, because the farmers have to travel long distances. They have to transport the animals long distances so that these animals are sold and they make money. Mr. Speaker, I think the issue of food security is very critical, and it is an issue that the government needs to put a lot of emphasis. But as they do so, food security cannot be substituted with interfering with the health condition of our people. Mr. Speaker, yesterday we had a motion of adjournment on the issue of GMOs. I want to say in this House today, and I want to go on record, that GMO will not solve the food security problem in this country. It will even worsen the food security in this country. It has happened so in other African countries. We should ask ourselves why Europe has banned the use of GMOs. Why are we going for GMOs? Even Americans themselves, who are leading producers of GMO, they don't feed on GMOs. GMOs is meant for animals. We are not animals as Kenyans to bring GMOs to us to feed on. We need the government to invest in our traditional crops and be able to provide food in this country. We need investment in water supply, dams, as one of the infrastructures to support food security. So, Mr. Speaker, this motion is very timely, and I want to ask members to support this motion, because if we have the right policies in place, then we will move ahead as a country in terms of providing food for our people. Mr. Speaker, I have complained in the past about motions in this House. And I said that it is a high time we look at the way we structure our motion in this House. Because we don't want motions to be an opportunity to talk, just to talk and nothing happens. We need a motion that will give resolutions which will be acted on by the government. For example, if you look at this motion, it's a very nice motion. But then it says, Senate urges the Ministry of Agriculture. We will want to say that Senate resolves, so that we make resolutions that are going to be acted on by the government agencies, not resolutions which will go there, accumulate dust, and nothing happens. We cannot legislate in vain, Mr. Speaker. We want to debate motions that the government will take seriously and act on them. If we cannot structure this motion to say resolves because of money bill effect, then, Mr. Speaker, I think we need to work out how we are going to handle the issue of money bill. But that should not limit us in the way we do our motions in this House. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to urge the House Business Committee and the leadership of this House, please let us think about the issue of motions that are brought in this House. Those motions are very good. I remember Honorable Sifuna brought a motion on parking. Very good motion with very good recommendation. But because it is talking about urging the government to do, then nothing much will happen. Mr. Speaker, for those few remarks, I support and I encourage members to also support this motion. And please, Honorable Cherargei, you have stood for your people in North Rift by fighting this importation of maize, by fighting GMO. But the problem is, yesterday, when we were discussing GMO, you left the chamber. You ran away. Please continue standing for your people, and your people in Nandi love what you are doing, and the Kenyans love what you are doing, and don't be intimidated. Don't be intimidated. Fight for your people. I come from a maize growing area. I will not support GMO because GMO is going to kill our people. GMO is meant for animals. GMO has been tested to kill rats. So the government of Honorable President William Ruto, please spare us this GMO. And us in the opposition, we will not tire to say the truth about GMO. GMO is poison to our people. GMO is going to affect food security in this country. And as leaders, regardless of your political position, whether you are in Kenya Kwanza or you are in Azimio, please do what is right for your people of Kenya. And I congratulate my neighbor Cherargei for standing firm against this unfair decision by GMO. And Mr. Speaker, we cannot have a minister who is talking very recklessly like Moses Kuria, that he is saying that GMO is one of the things that kills people. That alone, if you are in a serious democratic country, that alone will have sent you home. So, Mr. Speaker, for those few remarks, I support, and I call upon members to support this motion.
Senator Chalge.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for this opportunity. I don't know why my neighbor, Senator Otsotsi, is on fire. Mr. Speaker, you need to direct the catering and facility services to investigate what members are eating, because he is today on fire, which is unusual of him. Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I rise to support this motion. Mr. Speaker, one of the people who suffer the most in this country is a farmer. We have left the farmers at the vagaries of demand and supply without protection mechanisms that should be put in place, Mr. Speaker. Anywhere, look at the economy of Brazil. The reason the current president has been re-elected of Brazil, who defeated the Trump of South America, Bolsonaro, Mr. Speaker, the current president, is because during his time, apart from doing affordable housing, he ensured that he protected farmers and ensured that farmers get value for their crop, Mr. Speaker. Because Kenya is an agro-economy country, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, Lula da Silva, who paid a visit to this country a few years ago during Kibaki administration, has been re-elected simply because of standing with farmers, the issue of affordable housing, Mr. Speaker, And therefore, we learned a lot. You travel, Mr. Speaker, I indicated earlier, to many of these countries. You will not be allowed to play with a farmer. A farmer is next to God in some of the countries because they are the people who feed a nation. They are the people who ensure Kenyans and anywhere across the world have opportunity, Mr. Speaker. This motion by Senator Mwenda Gadhaya Mofaya, the great senator of Tharaka Nithi, is timely. This is the time we are discussing about food security. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate that there are 4 million Kenyans who are suffering from hunger, Mr. Speaker. We agree, counties are affected by drought and famine. But, Mr. Speaker, this is a climate change phenomenon. But it is on our own mistake of refusing to plan. When agriculture was devolved, Mr. Speaker, during the last, and we insisted like 2-3 years ago, that, Mr. Speaker, there were 11 billion that was with the National Strategic Grain Reserve. That money, Mr. Speaker, no one knows where it is. What happened with the previous CS of Agriculture? What did he do with the National Strategic Grain Reserve? Why was the National Grain Strategic Reserve, Mr. Speaker, destroyed or made non-functional is a story for another day. Mr. Speaker, I've had a misnomer and miscommunication from even leaders on the floor of the House that are alleging that farmers in North Rift or maize-growing areas are holding maize. Mr. Speaker, for your information, we are not holding maize. It is because of propaganda that they want to destroy the integrity of farmers, Mr. Speaker. And as a leader who represents farmers in this House, Mr. Speaker, we shall not allow people who eat pizza and other things like rice and everything, Mr. Speaker, to try and make propaganda against maize farmers. Mr. Speaker, this is the season that we are harvesting maize, Mr. Speaker. And then the question Kenyans should ask themselves is, including city senator, because I know they don't plant maize, but they consume a lot, is National Cereals and Produce Board is not open. Why do you want us to take our maize? National Grain Strategic Reserves is not open. Where do you want us to take our maize? Should we take to the individual members of parliament? Should we take to Mr. Speaker, to the Cabinet Secretary's office? Does the Cabinet Secretary of Trade wanted us to mop up all the maize and take it to his office so that he can know there is maize? That is a question that everybody is asking, Mr. Speaker, and we need to be honest and fair to ourselves. To move forward as a country, we must be honest. We cannot mislead the public that farmers are holding maize, yet NCPB is not open. National Strategic Grain Reserve, or the minister should have told us, NCPB is not open, Strategic Grain Reserves is not open, bring to my office. We would have lined up in his office here in Nairobi. And Mr. Speaker, the Gazette notice that allows 10 million duty-free maize, Mr. Speaker, should not be gazetted anytime. It should be rescinded or delayed up to April next year to allow our farmers to harvest, mop up the maize, Mr. Speaker, and then we sell. Mr. Speaker, in fact, what we are proposing is simple. We bought fertilizer at 7,000 shillings. We want 7,000 shillings per bag of maize. Deal done. Zero-sum game, Mr. Speaker. Because apart from buying expensive, it took their heart. We were very patriotic. We went to farming when the inputs were very expensive in the last planting season. We appreciate the government of His Excellency William Ruto, that at least the fertilizer subsidy has been reintroduced, where we'll be buying 33,500 per bag. And we hope, God willing, during the next planting season, 2023, it can even come down to 2,500. We hope the cost of fuel will come down. Mr. Speaker, I want to assure the country, if the cost of production will come down, I can assure, Mr. Speaker, we shall sell even our maize at 1,500 or 1,000 per bag, so long as the input is cheaper. Mr. Speaker, as my brother Senator Jackson Mandako said, for us who come from North Rift, it is maize it has made us who I am. Mr. Speaker, I would not have gone to school if my parents were not farming and doing business of maize. Everything from clothes, school fees, livelihoods in the North Rift, and maize growing areas, Mr. Speaker, is because of maize. And we cannot allow, Mr. Speaker, I know there are people who want to kill maize farming. It shall not happen under our watch. Sugarcane was killed. If they reach a time where sugarcane in this country, Mr. Speaker, were being imported from Brazil and repackaged into the packets of Mumia Sugar Company, Mr. Speaker. That's how it was destroyed. Coffee is on its knees. Tea is on ICU. Mira is receiving the last singing songs called Diage in literature, Mr. Speaker. So if we don't rise and protect the interest of farming, there will be no food security. Now there is Ukraine and Russian war, Mr. Speaker. Imagine if we were depending on Ukraine to get food to this country. What would have happened? So, Mr. Speaker, we need to be honest in this country and ask our cabinet ministers, especially the CS of Trade, to stop making reckless statements that is not even behold to any deserving leader in this republic, Mr. Speaker. And some of us are ready to teach him the leadership etiquette and mannerism on how you can do good public speaking without antagonizing our people unnecessarily, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the issue on the issue of working with counties, I agree that counties must be given a priority. The role of Ministry of Agriculture, Mr. Speaker, is only on national policy, and therefore we want to call upon county governments. I think one of my colleagues has asked, where is the county government? I have seen the statement, Mr. Speaker, by Council of Governors, led by immediate former Speaker of this House, Senator, Governor, Speaker Kenneth Magelo Lusaka has issued a statement on behalf of the Council of Governors. We are interested to have a conversation as stakeholders. Our interest, Mr. Speaker, is not to antagonize anybody or any agency. Our interest is the farmer and the common mwananchi. And I think I want to thank Council of Governors for bringing that to the attention of the nation. We are looking forward into partnering and ensuring that we move into the future. Mr. Speaker, on the issue of feeding program, even, Mr. Speaker, we don't want the animals from Kajiado or drought-stricken areas, the animals to be bought with 1,500 shillings per cow. We want also them to be given value. That's how you protect that farmer. Because when you go to Kajiado, Marsabit, anywhere, Turkana, their livelihood is cows, animals, and therefore, Mr. Speaker, they should be bought with good price, Mr. Speaker. Let them get value, Mr. Speaker, for those things so that we can sustain the farmer, Mr. Speaker, under guarantee minimum returns, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I agree with the government of His Excellency President William Ruto. I say that it is important to subsidize production than consumption, and we shall support the government when it comes to putting in place rules and regulations and structures, Mr. Speaker, that will ensure, Mr. Speaker, that we subsidize production in going into the future, Mr. Speaker. And I want to assure the country, if we plan better, if famine and drought strike, if we plan better, Mr. Speaker, no Kenyan should die because of hunger. No child should cook a chameleon somewhere in Nbagon in Nakuru simply because there is no food, Mr. Speaker. No Kenyan should eat, Mr. Speaker, or die because of hunger, Mr. Speaker. Under the Sustainable Development Goals, the aim that we look into the future of this country, Mr. Speaker, is to have a food sustainable nation, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, I'm calling upon, and we shall support the government in making sure there are policies. And I want to thank Senator Minority Leader, my Senator retired Justice Stewart Manzayo, a ranking member of this House, for having a conversation about GMO. Mr. Speaker, the cabinet approved. The president, when we went for a meeting, the president has assured us that we shall have a conversation from all stakeholders, from parliament, from church, from public, to ensure we have a consensus on this issue of GMO products into the country, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, I thank the minority leader for having that conversation. And Mr. Speaker, because of exigencies of duties yesterday, and you know, I'm a very forthright person, Mr. Speaker. Because of exigencies of duties yesterday, I was not able to be part of the conversation. But I want to assure you, Mr. Speaker, when that matter comes officially through the cabinet memo, you shall find the voice of Senator Cherargei on the matter, Mr. Speaker. Because some of us were not, where I come from, and also the voice of Senator Mazza, where I come from is the land of Koitalel Samoe, who led the Nandi resistance against the British rule for many years, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, we were not born to be cowards. We will speak when it needs to be, and we'll support when it needs to be, Mr. Speaker. So I want to assure my colleagues who are wondering where I was yesterday that this matter will keep recurring, and my voice will be heard at an opportune time, Mr. Speaker. And we will push and ensure that the usage of GMO in this country is within the provided health and safety standards within this country. So I want to assure Senator Sifuna, I saw him tweeting, Mr. Speaker, but you know they should not be tweeting House business matters on Twitter. They should come and say it on the floor of the House. He was saying he gave me a manifesto. I don't know, I've never seen that manifesto. Maybe you put it somewhere or you imagine that you have given me. But I hope after this you can give me that manifesto, Mr. Speaker, so that we want a better Kenya. And I think that is yeah. Mr. Speaker. Yes. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, I still, my Senator Professor Tom Ojenda, as my teacher, you should be learning quickly. The light is still yellow. So I told it is no problem. So, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, and I appreciate members want to contribute, I wouldn't belabor. You know, this thing is passionate, Senator Sifuna, because, Mr. Speaker, I come from maize growing area. I feel at a loss when farmers is at a crossroad. That is what is making all this, Mr. Speaker. And since the light is now red, Mr. Speaker, I beg to support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Senator Tom Ojenda.
Mr. Speaker, sir, let me speak from from the dispatch, okay. Mr. Speaker, sir, I also rise to support the motion on food security. And Mr. Speaker, sir, I want to do this from a multifaceted point. Mr. Speaker, sir, it is the duty of this generation to ensure that for the sake of both intra-generational equity and intergenerational equity, we provide a basis that would ensure that future generations in this country are able not only to feed themselves, but to have a foundation to feed themselves. This afternoon, Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise to speak both as a senator for Kisumu County, but also as a farmer, Mr. Speaker, sir. I'm a farmer both in the maize sector, where I do some small farming, and I feed various people. I'm also a farmer in the sugar sector. And I think it is the diversity of farming or agriculture in its various forms that will feed this country. The North Rift and other regions, the Rift Valley, are the food basket, have been described as the food basket of this country. And that is why Senator Cherargei is passionate about maize farming, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, to achieve sustainable food security, we need to have a number of sectors working properly for the sake of this country, Mr. Speaker, sir. For maize to thrive and the growing of maize to thrive, we need the National Cereals Produce Board to work so that we have the strategic grain reserves in this country full with crop to the next year, so that farmers who produce maize for commercial value are compensated and are able to buy inputs and to buy fertilizers and till their land with ease for the next crop. That means that government needs to inject sufficient funds into the National Cereals and Produce Board and to ensure that the strategic grain reserve has sufficient maize so that in the event that we do not have favorable weather for the next season, Mr. Speaker, sir, there's enough food to feed maize for Kenyans. And Mr. Speaker, sir, we appreciate that ugali is a delicacy and a basic food for most Kenyans. I think in most regions, we find that ugali or maize is consumed across all the regions. Mr. Speaker, sir, we should not stop at maize. The production of beans, the production of other crops like rice in the Mwea area, in Ahero, will contribute to food security in this country. Government must therefore inject enough capital to ensure that we expand the areas that are currently under the growth of production of rice, both in Ahero, increase the acreage in production of rice, and in Mwea, so that again we are able to have, Mr. Speaker, sir, grain or rice grain sufficient to feed the people of this country. Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, sir, in the other sectors within livestock and agriculture, we must also harness the strength of other regions like Northeastern, Mr. Speaker, sir, by ensuring that livestock is able to, Mr. Speaker, sir, thrive even during bad weather, Mr. Speaker, sir. That would call, Mr. Speaker, sir, for a working scheme, a well-managed Kenya Meat Commission that would provide market for animals and that would therefore ensure, Mr. Speaker, sir, that we do not waste animals or lose animals to drought like I saw in this season, Mr. Speaker, sir, where Kajiado and other counties lost livestock because of bad weather. We need, Mr. Speaker, sir, to also increase the, Mr. Speaker, sir, harness and take advantage of our rivers and ensure that we have sufficient dams. So the government would have to put money in dams that will work to the benefit of our farmers. Mr. Speaker, sir, let me take this opportunity to also thank His Excellency the President, William Samoei Arap Ruto, for investing Kenya shillings 1 billion towards the research in fisheries in Kadibo in Kisumu County. That will go far in ensuring that the fishing sector and fish production is enhanced, and this will also contribute towards food security in this country. And Mr. Speaker, sir, just a few weeks ago, Kisumu County lost a lot of fish to cage fish farming, either because of scientific reasons or because of bad fish feeding products. And Mr. Speaker, sir, I raised a question in this House on that question. We must ensure that in every region of this country, Mr. Speaker, sir, where there is a resource, the government puts money to ensure that farmers of all types, fish farmers, maize farmers, livestock farmers, and all farmers are taken care of. Even the areas, Mr. Speaker, sir, under sugarcane are taken care of so that farmers are taken care of and are liquid enough to invest in other sources, Mr. Speaker, sir, of ensuring that they are able to cater for themselves and their families and have sufficient a surplus to sell in some form so that we do not, Mr. Speaker, sir, get to a point where we only address a crisis after a crisis, Mr. Speaker, sir. Food security is important in this country. It's important that the government focuses on the strength of every community, even amongst the Meru, Mr. Speaker, sir. Let us have enough resources or investment in a sector as vibrant as Mira, because that way, then intercropping will lead to some form of sustainability in a sector that is important to the people of that particular region, Mr. Speaker, sir. I support and I thank you for bringing up this debate, because this country, we cannot, Mr. Speaker, sir, be speaking to issues we spoke to 20 years ago. In 1984, when the world was united for famine in Ethiopia, we are facing that crisis 25 years later. That is unacceptable. This country and the government must stand up and protect its people for the sake of not only of today, Mr. Speaker, sir, but I spoke of intra-generational interests and intergenerational interests, so that this country moves forward for the benefit of its people. And we truly work as leaders, Mr. Speaker, sir, for our people. I thank you.
Senator Sifuna Edwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, Mr. Speaker, it is public knowledge that my ancestral home is in Bungoma, where for a very long time we were sugarcane farmers, Mr. Speaker. It was quite interesting watching my brother, Senator Cherargei, speak, because they say, Mr. Speaker, that if you watch or cheer as a crocodile feeds on the children of your neighbor, when it is done with those children, it will come for your own children. For a very long time, the cries of the people of Western who are sugarcane farmers have been ignored. We have been saying that we need to curb the problem of importation of sugar because it is killing our industries. But because we are gracious people, we are not actually laughing at the farmers in the North Rift about what is befallen them now. In fact, we are crying with them. Because as it just happens, Mr. Speaker, we also grow maize in Western Kenya. Mr. Speaker, perhaps we could start with understanding what this food security is. And just a cursory search will tell you that food security means when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, nutritious food that meets their dietary needs, food preference for an active and healthy life. Mr. Speaker, if I break down those requirements, it is actually possible for you to have physical access to food, but you do not have the economic access to that food. If you have a bag of maize here that is going for 10,000 shillings, I am physically near the bag, but I cannot actually afford to buy that bag, then there is no food security. Mr. Speaker, the second limb is that it has to be sufficient and, most importantly, safe. This is where this entire discussion about whether GMO is the panacea to food security in this country is cropping up. And I am happy that I have heard my brother, Senator Cherargei, saying that the president, in some, private meeting with him, has assured the country that there will have to be a discussion on the move to lift the ban on GMOs before those GMOs are imported. I am a bit concerned, Mr. Speaker, because in my understanding, and yesterday we spoke about this, the Constitution requires that this discussion must be had prior to that decision to lift the ban, not after. It doesn't make any sense. And our greater concern stems from the fact that we are already hearing that even as Cherargei, Senator Cherargei, carrying product that we don't know whether is GMO or non-GMO, Mr. Speaker. The last limb there, that the food must meet their dietary needs and food preferences, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you know that for us, from the Mulembe nation, our preference is ugali. It is maize. Mr. Speaker, this means it is actually possible that you can lock a Luya man like myself in a store full of cooked rice and njahe, for instance, enough for a year. But you will find me dead from starvation after 3 days, because that's not my preference. I don't consider it food for me, Mr. Speaker. So all these criteria must be met for us to ensure food security. Mr. Speaker, the mover or the person who has brought this motion, the mover himself, has identified why we are in this problem, why Kenya is not a food secure nation. Number one, he has talked about inadequate rainfall. Number two is decline in the number of farmers and the farmlands under cultivation. Incidentally, although he is from the Kenya Kwanza coalition, he has also cited the war in Ukraine. This is curious because when the former president Uhuru Kenyatta said that in fact the war in Ukraine had a bearing on the prices of food and availability of food globally, It is the Kenya Kwanza coalition that rubbished him and said that is an excuse. And lastly, he has cited the high cost of inputs, Mr. Speaker. So we would want this conversation. In fact, if these are the reasons why we are in the position we are, then we should be discussing solutions to all those problems that have been identified as the causes of the insecurity when it comes to food in this country. So what had we proposed for those of us in the Azimio coalition? On the question of inadequate rainfall, Mr. Speaker, it is now acknowledged that because of the phenomenon of climate change, it is becoming increasingly difficult for us to rely on rain-fed agriculture because the weather patterns have changed so drastically that farmers can no longer predict with any certainty when it's going to rain, when it's not going to rain, when it's time to plant, and when it's time not to plant. We had proposed as the Azimio coalition, Mr. Speaker, to move away drastically from rain-fed agriculture and invest more in irrigation. Mr. Speaker, we strongly spoke about the need for us to revive the major irrigation schemes, including Galana Kulalu, which, Mr. Speaker, we all know was, the entire scheme collapsed because of one thing and one thing only, and that is corruption, Mr. Speaker. And which is why, when we were campaigning, we were very, very strong on this issue of combating corruption because it rears its ugly head in all spheres of our lives, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the decline in the number of farmers and farms under cultivation, we should be encouraging people to engage in agriculture, Mr. Speaker. But what has happened in the past, and even currently, is that we continue to discourage people from engaging in agriculture as a commercial enterprise. As Senator Mandago said, this is not a hobby. There are people whose livelihoods depend on agriculture and agriculture only. Mr. Speaker, if you see what is happening right now, and I compared this, what is going on in the country right now, to a fight between farmers and traders. It's the traditional fight, even within the sugar industry, that has always been there, between people who believe in an honest work, that you can spend 6 months on a farm tending to your crop, 8 months on a farm tending to your crop, an honest living where you earn the sweat of your brow, Mr. Speaker. And at the end of that, there's a product for you to take to the market. And there are people who sit in air-conditioned rooms here in Nairobi, just with, there is an application, Mr. Speaker, that shows you where all the ships in the world are at any particular time, including flights, Mr. Speaker. You can tell whether an Ethiopian Airlines or a Kenya Airways flight has reached London that took off in the morning. All those people do is to sit with those manifests of sheep carrying product, whether it is sugar, whether it is maize, seeing which is the nearest. Then they develop policy to ensure that by the time a gazette notice comes out, that sheep is in Mombasa. It's ridiculous, Mr. Speaker. Even now, our farmers are being blackmailed. In fact, it is pure blackmail, Senator Mandago, because your farmers are being told, if you don't sell the maize that you have in your stores or the ones that you're harvesting at the price that we want, at the price that we have set, irrespective of whether it is lower or higher than the inputs that went into producing that maize, that we are going to import maize. It is a threat. It is blackmail, Mr. Speaker. There is nothing else to it. Mr. Speaker, we were also a bit concerned a few years back when the current president, His Excellency William Ruto, was the deputy president. And when the farmers in the Rift were complaining about, the reduction in profitability in farming maize, he actually encouraged them to move away from maize and start farming avocado. So, Senator Mofaya, when you talk about the decline in numbers of farmers, we must go back and ask ourselves, why are these numbers declining, Mr. Speaker? Then, Mr. Speaker, there's the question of high cost of inputs. For us in the Azimio coalition, we had proposed that, in fact, we need a broad analysis of all the costs that go into producing any crop and try and see if we can manufacture some of the inputs locally to make them cheaper and more available to the farmers. We talked about even investing in locally made mechanization, whether it is the tractors, whether it is the jembes. Mr. Speaker, it is quite unfortunate that even the most basic farm inputs are imported from elsewhere. And the question of setting up our own fertilizer factory, I was hoping that Senator Mandago, because he was the governor of Uasin Gishu, could give us, as a Senate, an idea of what happened to the fertilizer industry that we were supposed to set up in the North Rift to help our farmers, Mr. Speaker. So all these issues, for us, these are the proposals that we had made. And I have always argued that, in fact, if something makes sense, like on this particular issue, it doesn't matter which political persuasion you follow. It is a fact that we need to protect our farmers. We must do something about the current situation to stem future crises when it comes to food. And I believe that our colleagues, even on the other side and the majority side, will agree with us that some of the proposals we made are positive proposals to encourage production of food, Mr. Speaker. We both spoke about guaranteed minimum returns when we were campaigning. I heard the current president promise that, in fact, this is going to be a key pillar of his administration. We promised the same, and Mr. Speaker, we don't understand. Where have they departed from the promises that they made to wananchi? Mr. Speaker, we also spoke strongly about the need for agro-processing, that in fact, when we start infusing value to the produce that comes from our farms, we will see more profitability from this exercise and our farmers will be more encouraged to produce. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, let me address this question of the attitude that we are seeing from government in the face of all these complaints and cries about Kenyans that we need a conversation about this food importation before it is done. Mr. Speaker, if you look at our constitution, Article 73(1)(a), Sub-Article 3 and B, Mr. Speaker, it says that authority assigned to a state officer is a public trust to be exercised in a manner that demonstrates respect for the people. Then 73(2) goes on to say that it vests in the state officer the responsibility to serve the people rather than the power to rule them. Mr. Speaker, in light of all our cries as representatives of the people, in light of the cries of the church, in light of the cries of the farmers, how can a government continue hard-headedly to proceed with a program that is meeting with so much resistance and concern from the people of Kenya? Mr. Speaker, you can see that this attitude is not only with the CS for trade, because he has his boss. If indeed the president does not share in the attitude of the CS for trade, Moses Kuria, he should not even wait for members of parliament to collect signatures to impeach him. He should just say that this is not the attitude we came into power with. We came into power with the promise of being the government for the mwananchi, Mr. Speaker, because of the, the arrogance that is being displayed by the cabinet secretary, that he has the audacity to talk to the Kenyan people the way that he's talking, saying that, yes, we only have 1,000 ways to die. Why don't we add one more way to kill Kenyans, Mr. Speaker? And in light of all the complaints, in fact, what I expect him to do, Mr. Speaker, he should not dare gazette that importation that he wanted to gazette. He should hold off. If Senator Cherargei is to be believed, let us have that conversation as Kenyans about the safety of the food that is being imported into this country. And in the event that he, continues in that attitude where he believes that he's the boss of everyone, because this food, even this GMO that is going to be imported, Mr. Speaker, is not just going to be eaten in the household of CS Moses Kuria. It is for all of us. It is for all our children. We are not going to know the distinction. Mr. Speaker, people even spoke here about the need to label. But I argue that even if you label to a hungry man, Mr. Speaker, and you tell him this unga is GMO, but it's 10 shillings, and this one is organic, it's 100 shillings. It is a false choice for that person because they don't have much of a choice in that particular matter. So, Mr. Speaker, I stand to support. I would wish that some of the proposals that we had made during the campaigns can be adopted for us to invest more in irrigation, for us to invest more in manufacturing, especially manufacturing local manufacturing of inputs for farming. I would want for us to ensure that we support and encourage our farmers so that we do not keep seeing a decline in the number of those people who engage in farming. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Sige Hilary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for granting me this opportunity to also put in my support to the motion by the Honorable Senator Mofaya on food security in the country. Mr. Speaker, food is national security. Food is energy. food is economy. Mr. Speaker, food is employment, and indeed, food is everything. When the Honorable Mofaya brought in this motion, he took the House through the challenges that have led to the situation that we are experiencing. And Mr. Speaker, though he made reference to the economic and social rights under Article 43 of the Constitution, Mr. Speaker, food and security in production, both in agriculture for humankind and livestock, is a matter of justice. Mr. Speaker, sir, we had a debate last week here from the Honorable Senator from Kitui about the security of the people that had been compromised by the neighboring counties where they were looking for food for their livestock, and in particular, camels. Mr. Speaker, sir, this is a very, very important motion that the government should not just have it as just a motion. And I want to applaud Senator Osotsi for asking the honorable members of this House and the Senate at large to ensure that as we conclude on such debates, we do not urge the government or the relevant ministry to take certain action. Honorable Speaker, we should make certain resolutions and resolve to the extent that a government entity or organ with responsibility to provide certain demands be made to provide. Otherwise, Mr. Speaker, it will just be mere debate, mere conversation on what we feel as a House to be what we can discuss. Schools can only remain as institutions of higher learning when there are students, teachers, and parents are capable of sending their children to school. Without food, nobody can go to any institution because they are unable to do it. Mr. Speaker, families, the same thing. Institutions can only run when we have mankind able to run such institutions. And Mr. Speaker, the proposals which have been made by the honorable mover of the motion is touching on matters to do with what under Schedule 4 of the Constitution have been devolved. And Mr. Speaker, the proposition that we should enhance coordination with county governments on establishment of strategic reserves for grain stores, I want to support to the extent that we would urge all the county governments to ensure that each county government, as a requirement, be able to set up such strategic reserves so that even if they are not producers, they can purchase and keep food products in their reserves so that in dry seasons or in times when it is not sufficiently produced, they are able to provide for their people. Introduction and coordination of establishment of livestock feeding programs or livestock feeding logs, as they call them, should also be made a very important contribution and investment by the county governments where livestock are reared and where these livestock are normally the main source of income for the farmers. In this case, I'm making reference to counties like Kajiado or in Garissa, where livestock is the main source of income, and therefore they should be able to ensure that such feeding programs are a matter of very important investment by such county governments. As a member of Kenya Kwanza, I'm aware that part of the manifesto, of the major manifesto items, was to ensure that there is investment in agriculture and agriculture production. Mr. Speaker, there is also a commitment on the part of the government to ensure that there is subsidy in production of agriculture, which subsidy, as we speak right now, is involving the release or issuance of fertilizers to encourage farmers to enhance their production, and also to ensure that at the end of the day, the cost of production and ultimately the pricing is that which encourage someone to continue farming. Mr. Speaker, if we also push on the policy of the government that requires tree planting as a matter of urgency to ensure that we protect the environment, we enhance the effects of climate change, I am sure at the end of it all, we will be able to enhance food production, we will be able to ensure that we meet what is required as a country for purposes of food production and supply of livestock food or feed in the country. Mr. Speaker, it is coming at the time when there is a conversation across the world. The just ended conference in Egypt on climate change made certain conversations around climate change, both in within our country, where I am aware that we had sent a delegation of over 300 people. That sends a message of a commitment on the part of the government to ensure that this is an issue that we can take it to be an important factor in the government agenda. Mr. Speaker, sir, this motion is coming at a time when we really need to ensure we support, and as a House, I want to encourage everyone among the members of this House to do whatever is within their means to ensure that whatever recommendations or proposals which are going to be made are implemented where possible in each and every county where we are representative. Mr. Speaker, war against hunger is war on mankind's liberation. It is not hard to fight it out. It depends on the will of those who are in office, on the will of the farmer, on the will of the person who is expecting to feed the neighbor next to avail the necessary support. And Mr. Speaker, I support this motion, and I thank the Honorable Senator Mofaya for timely asking this House to debate on this very important motion. I thank you.
Senator Lematia Nyezena.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I also rise to support this motion on food security by Senator Mofaya of Tharaka Nithi. And Mr. Speaker, we must call a spade and not a big spoon. And it is never the wrong time to do and say the right thing. Mr. Speaker, it's very disheartening to learn that the country and the administration of His Excellency William Ruto is importing maize while they should be focusing on giving jobs and creating employment for the many jobless youth and women in this country who are very much capable of taking part in various and diverse agricultural activities. Mr. Speaker, according to the survey done by the Route to Food Security Advocacy Group, it showed that about over 50% of Kenyans are not interested in consumption of GMO foods. And as you know from Article 43 of our Constitution, that our citizens have the right to access secure and adequate food. And Mr. Speaker, in my opinion, I believe that the GMOs are really a threat to our food security and national security. And like we are being perceived to believe. Mr. Speaker, I believe our nation should be shifting focus from poverty eradication to wealth creation, in the sense that we have a very fertile country in terms of soils and productivity. We have a huge number of unemployed women and youth who are willing to go into agriculture. Case study is what Israel did, and what China and Singapore did in utilizing the human resource within their nations to advance the interest and securing the economic stability of their nations. Mr. Speaker, we must shun as leaders of Kenya and Africa at large from making our countries a dumping site of rejected items overseas. For instance, if you look at the company that bought the Monsanto company, which manufactures the GMOs, the buyer, it's a German company. But you know that the whole of Europe, apart from Spain, had rejected GMOs. Why is this German company going to sell their product to other countries, especially targeting Africa, and yet even Germany itself has banned the GMOs? Mr. Speaker, the fate of Kenya's food security lies, we cannot afford to put the fate of the Kenyan food security in the hands of these monopoly, self-enriching multinational corporations. And it's a very funny coincidence that recently the billionaire Bill Gates, who has a very keen interest in such firms and multinationals, was recently in Kenya, and then suddenly the debate on GMOs is rising and is the topic of discussion within the whole country. I believe that the administration of the day can do what they have to do. To get.
Don't look at the mic whether you have time. Look at the right in front of you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 1 minute, please.
There's no indication that you are time banned until you look.
Okay, thank you.
Lights in front.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm still learning the ropes. It's quite a dense forest. Mr. Speaker, we also know that the GMO pose a great risk to the biodiversity of our environment because through cross-pollination, we have something they call super seeds. And these seeds will threaten the pollination occurs from GMO products to our natural organic products. And this threatens our natural ecosystem. And Mr. Speaker, Africa should not be used as a dummy to practice what is rejected within other countries. Mr. Speaker, the herbicides called, the superweeds are resistant to herbicides. And what will that lead to? Mr. Speaker, once our biodiversity is threatened, our wild plants and wild crops will be affected. And given that Africa, the mother continent of the world, is the only place now with the potential of having organic foods, which, by the way, are very expensive in continents like the US, and we have the potential on a silver platter as Kenya and a very fertile country to produce more of these organic products and export them to these countries where they are very expensive. Because if you look at GMOs in the US, these are things consumed by the poor, blacks, and the Latinos. And why do they consume them? Because they are cheaper and they cannot be able to produce. Why? Because the production of organic foods is very expensive. And the US does not, by the way, the GMOs are manufactured by very few billionaires. So when they're coming to dump it in Africa, it means only a small handful of people are going to benefit from the riches of the GMOs. And if you look at surveys and studies, the next billionaires are going to come from agriculture and ICT. And why can't Kenya and Africa at large be thinking about diversifying our economic possibilities and agricultural diversity to be able to get into the list of the billionaires and to be able to contribute to the global, the GDP of our country in a positive way. Mr. Speaker, we cannot afford to bury our heads in the sand, and we must call a spade, not a big spoon. And I am calling on our both coalitions to come and stand as one, because we will always say the right thing, because it's never wrong. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I rise to support.
Thank you, Senator Tobiko Pelis.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I rise to support the motion by the
Senator Mwenda Gataya Mofaya, Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, it's coming at the right time when the country is facing a very difficult situation of drought and climate change. It's coming at the time when everywhere in this country and maybe even around the globe, everybody is talking about food security and food scarcity, Mr. Speaker. And so I think I congratulate Senator Mofaya because of bringing a very timely motion, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me say that this is about food production, food security, and agriculture holistically, not just farming, crop farming. It's also about livestock farming, Mr. Speaker, which at the moment is threatened. We have lost, I believe right now, we have lost around 3/4 of our livestock, Mr. Speaker. And so this is the right time for Kenyans to engage in this topic. Not just the leadership, not just the Senate, not the executive, but every Kenyan should be engaged on how to make Kenya food secure, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, currently around more than 4 billion Kenyans are facing starvation because of the drought, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I do agree with Senator Mofaya that our counties should be thinking very seriously and putting policies in place that will make our counties food secure, that will enhance food production, Mr. Speaker. And the national government should also be, thinking very seriously about subsidizing production instead of and not consumption, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we should be thinking about value addition on all livestock products and farming and farm production, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know the Kenya Kwanza government, before the general election, went around the country, engaged all communities and all counties in economic forums, and there was a fair participation by, wananchi on what they want to see happening, Mr. Speaker. And a lot of what today is, being proposed by the Kenya Kwanza government is what has the wananchi have been engaged on, Mr. Speaker. I remember the economic forum in Kajiado, Mr. Speaker, where people came out and discussed about, what to do with the livestock and livestock products, including hides and skins, that today we could be carrying leather handbags, having leather shoes coming from our own, livestock, instead of wasting such, valuable products, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the asal areas, if we get fair water provision, I am sure Kajiado today could feed Nairobi, because we have the land, we have, a fair environment, we have good sunshine. All that we need is water so that, production is done, and we will be feeding this country, feeding Nairobi. Honorable Speaker, I have listened to my colleagues in this House, and I have come to love the debate in this House, Mr. Speaker, because when a senator talks from one corner and another one talks from one corner, it shows and reflects the diversity of our country. You'll find Senator Cherargei who will be speaking about, a lot of surplus of maize at the moment that's being produced. And you'll find some from a different direction, like some of us, coming from places that are facing serious scarcity of food. And, so when we blend, when we bring the discussion here, I am sure we will be able to give direction to this country. We will be able to discuss and agree on what is the best way forward, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, even because I didn't want to engage myself in the debate of the GMOs, because at the moment I'm doing a serious research on it and would want to engage myself when I have all factors on my fingertips. But when I was listening to my colleagues, I was saying there is a problem, Mr. Speaker. I think here we have an issue of, you know, plenty versus scarcity. When you talk to a hungry man who has no food on the table, and you say this is maize, whether it's GMO or whatever, you know, beggars are not choosers. A hungry person will not choose, Mr. Speaker. And I don't know whether, you know, the issue is only in, you know, farming produce, whether it's only the maize that is GMO. There are a lot of other things that we consume in this country, including medication. You go to a chemist and you're told, this medicine is generic, this one is not. This one is more expensive, this one is not. It is you to make a choice. We go to these hotels in Nairobi, Mr. Speaker, and the chicken we are consuming, you are told, this one is kienyeji, this one is a broiler. It is for you to choose. So I think even the story of GMO, whether GMO or not GMO, is neither here nor there. When there is hunger, when you see a child in Turkana, and we have seen them in the media being carried because they can't even walk, would you tell that person not to consume this food because it is GMO? What I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, the first thing we owe Kenyans is that there should be food. There should be food production. Yes, we can produce organically. There is a lot of manure from our lands. I think that will be gold to us. We will sell to these counties that are producing maize. Instead of fertilizers, they can have the manure. As we sell the manure to them, they produce for us the maize, Mr. Speaker. But I think we should not bury our heads in the sand just because you're full and you expect a hungry person to be choosing, you know, that this is GMO or not GMO, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I support the development of livestock feeding programs in ASAL regions, Mr. Speaker. You know, we have seen the livestock dying, and we would wish that the same way government intervenes when coffee farmers have problems, when tea farmers are not having a good market, or when the way they get cushioned, we expect the same government of Kenya to cushion the livestock farmers, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I agree that there should be coordination with the National Drought Management Authority, Mr. Speaker, you know, to address the drought situation in the country and subsidizing agricultural products, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we had the CS for Education yesterday in the Committee of Education. And we were having a serious discussion about the school feeding program, and that there are counties that have not yet received food for schools, and that seriously I need. And Mr. Speaker, sorry, nowadays, you know, I'm glad that there are several Madam Speakers, but and I'm seeing my SG here, sometimes she's also on the chair. But Mr. Speaker, let me go to the core thing that I wanted to say. That, you know, schools, because of the climate change, Mr. Speaker, if schools can be used as units and demonstration centers, where several ministries can come into partnership, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Water, Ministry of Environment. The Ministry of Water will provide water in the schools and do water storage and do water harvesting. Then the Ministry of Environment will bring the seedlings and let the schools plant trees. Let the schools provide nurseries for the communities for distribution of seedlings. Let schools be also demonstration centers of the crops that work in certain areas. I am sure a lot of things can be done, and a lot of we can address the issue of climate change using schools as demonstration centers, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, we expect these ministries to work in partnership and to bring synergy together so that we address the issue of climate change and address the issue of food security. Mr. Speaker, I support. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Honorable Senators, I want to encourage you that I can see we have 3 requests. To start with the Senator Catherine, then we have Senator Koiti of Mutata, and then Senator Esther. So I want to encourage you to stay around so that you can also make your contributions. This is a very important motion. Senator Catherine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me to contribute to this very, very important motion, and to congratulate Senator Mofaya for bringing up the issue. Mr. Speaker, food security is the first line of defense for any country. It is the most important activity for any commander-in-chief. Mr. Speaker, hunger kills pretty much in the similar way as the person who invades the country with a bomb or with guns. That's why countries that take the security of their citizens seriously ensure that they invest very well and adequately in food security. Mr. Speaker, I have listened to this debate, but this debate has been there. If you review the Hansards for both houses, year in, year out, we discuss the issue of famine, we discuss the issue of surplus maize from farmers not being bought, we discuss the issue of a man, one man or other, taking advantage of the drought situation in order to make themselves wealthy. Mr. Speaker, if you review our Hansards, you will find that this very debate happens every year in this house and in the other house. Mr. Speaker, even as I support the motion, as a house, we need to introspect and ask what we can do differently in order to resolve this issue. Because if you're speaking to a government and complaining about corrupt ways of dealing with a disaster in a country, and you speak over it, and next year you come back again and do the same debate, and there is no change, it means we are doing the same thing over and over again, knowing very well it is going to fail. Mr. Speaker, I'm therefore requesting that beyond what Senator Mofaya has asked, that as a house that exists to defend and protect devolved governance, we need to know that the people of Kenya devolved agriculture, they devolved health, they devolved water services in order for the people of Kenya to take charge of matters affecting their livelihood. So as a house, we must come up with resolutions that will help to once and for all make the governments in this country, both national and county governments, to take the issue of food security more seriously than they have taken it. Mr. Speaker, isn't it ironical that in the same county you're hearing of people complaining of surplus food, while in another place we hear of children dying because there is no food? You hear of farmers in Nyandarua asking for the government to go and collect potatoes for free and feed people, and in another location, a child is on the ground crawling because they cannot eat. Mr. Speaker, what other evidence do we have to know that we don't have it right as a country on a matter of food security? Mr. Speaker, the investment we put in our army should be secondary only to the investment that we put in food security. So of all the resolutions or the asks that Senator Mofaya has made, I would want to urge this House to go beyond that and ask for even more radical changes that will see this country deal seriously with the issue of food security. Mr. Speaker, I know both houses are currently looking at how we can ensure that the CDF survives, because the CDF is a fund that has supported development that people are happy with. Mr. Speaker, why can we not have a county food subsidy fund also being established? Mr. Speaker, this government promised that it will protect the citizens of this country. And these citizens include the 2 children who were saved recently, I forget in what location, the ones who were crawling on the ground with their bellies because they had not eaten. We need to put in place a fund also that will ensure no life is lost because of hunger. So among the suggestions that are being put there, I dare suggest that this House should recommend the establishment of a food subsidy fund per county, equitably provided in order for the counties to move. I further suggest that the Council of Governors be made to understand that agriculture is devolved. So if they come up with an inter-county caucus that can ensure that what is happening in Nyandarua is able to save what is happening in Kajiado. What is happening in Uasin Gishu and Bungoma can provide support for what is happening in West Pokot. That is why we have an intergovernmental clause in the Constitution to facilitate cooperation, consultation for the benefit of the citizens of this country. So beyond what is happening, I suggest that an intergovernmental and inter-county mechanism be put in place to ensure that we have serious conversation about protecting and ensuring food and nutrition security for this country. Mr. Speaker, as we continue speaking, I want to also bring it to our attention. One of the things we should be oversighting is how well the devolved governance in the Constitution has been achieved. Mr. Speaker, everybody is complaining about the cereals board not doing what it is supposed to do. Mr. Speaker, the cereals board, properly speaking, should be an intergovernmental entity. And one of the things we need to do is to ask for the restructuring of that entity in order to have a conversation on food security that brings both actors at the national and the county levels to be able to address the issue of food reserves in this country. Mr. Speaker, the issue of one man, and I say one man because it is usually a man, riding on drought to make themselves wealthy must also stop. Food security needs to be taken so seriously that we cannot leave one minister to decide when to import what foodstuff. I'm also suggesting that a food security mechanism, national food security mechanism, be established. And on that entity, we should have farmers represented. Coffee farmers, potato farmers, maize farmers, to be represented on that entity so that when we want to import food, we should truly import because there is a need to import. The issue should be conducted in a transparent manner so that the decision to import maize is not a decision of one individual. The amount of maize we are importing should not be a decision of one individual. Where that maize comes from should not be the decision of one individual. If we take this seriously, then the issue of food security will be in the hands of the people of Kenya. Mr. Speaker, I stand to support. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator, for your contribution. Senator Waheti Nduati Veronica.
Mr. Speaker, sir, thank you for this opportunity, and I rise to support this motion brought to the floor of this House by Senator Mofaya on food security. In fact, Mr. Speaker, sir, food security carries a multi-dimension phenomenon that looks into certain aspects of factors that either contribute to support the food security or to bring about food insecurity. And one of the underlying pillars that can bring stability to this issue is a food policy that is coherent and developed in a manner that is customized to meet the needs of every county in this country. Mr. Speaker, sir, we need to ask ourselves very hard questions, not just as government, not just as different actors or stakeholders, but also as a Kenyan people. Mr. Speaker, sir, it is true that the nation of Kenya does have arable land that produces substantial amount of food that can feed this nation. But Mr. Speaker, sir, we remember with a lot of emotion the days when Nyandarua County produced excess milk, and Kenyans watched this excess milk being poured because for one reason or the other, that bounty harvest from their livestock could not be managed or harnessed in such a manner that it could be used 1 month later when maybe the feeds or the pastures were not as good as at the time when those cows were having bountiful production. Mr. Speaker, sir, this issue has been discussed not just by this parliament, but by previous parliaments, Mr. Speaker, sir. And one question we must ask ourselves, Mr. Speaker, sir, is why it keeps recurring day in, day out, this season, that season, following the weather pattern. Indeed, this discussion goes as good as the weather patterns that we have in our nation. So then, it either means we are managing the food security or the food insecurity, or the weather pattern is the one that is in charge of managing our food pattern. What is our trend? From farming right up to production, up to storage, to marketing, to sales. How do we handle those sequence of events, Mr. Speaker, sir? I like the proposals that have been brought forth by Senator Mofaya. And in these propositions, Mr. Speaker, sir, we must be able as a people to now allow this function to be fully devolved, supported fully by national government, but be devolved to the county government, and not stopping at the level of just county, but cascading down to the ward level and cascading down to the homesteads and to the households, engaging the citizens to be part of the solution in that food security, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, as I support this motion, I would wish to note one big issue, Mr. Speaker, sir, that we would spend hours here debating on this motion, but if we are not looking keenly at one of the factors that affect food security, being poverty or the amount of money in people's pockets, we might risk wasting our time debating an issue, repeating the same points that are being raised by every senator or every member of parliament, Mr. Speaker, sir. Food security and rampant poverty cannot be separated. Even if we speak until the cows come home to roost, Mr. Speaker, sir, and the farmer does not have any funds or finances to be able to manage the factors of production, to be able to manage what is happening in their farms, to be able to bring in the farm machinery that is needed or the equipment, Mr. Speaker, sir, we may not be helping much. But the proposition by Senator Mofaya about the county governments taking responsibility, if we focus on that, Mr. Speaker, sir, then we would ask the county governments to allocate and secure a certain fund which should not be utilized for any other purpose except to work around the food policy for that specific county. A certain percentage of their resource, if this food security is as important as everybody agrees from either side of the divide, then it means it's a point that we are in common agreement about and should not be negotiated. And once that is agreed, it must be reflected in the budgets. It must reflect in our budgets, in our allocation of resources, to ensure that we can move our farmers from one point to the other. But Mr. Speaker, sir, I propose that it must move beyond the debate to action. Action that we can hold counties accountable to, action that we can say that County X gave these propositions on the use of their 10% of their budget towards food policy or towards food security. Mr. Speaker, sir, if we are not coming out with such deliverables from the reports or from the action points that are coming from the counties, I can promise you next year we will debate this motion once again, emotionally, very compassionate, looking at those pictures that we don't like to see, but we will be back to square one unless there is an actionable plan that can show where we are moving from as Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, sir, the issue of maize and the harvest that farmers are having right now in Trans Nzoia and in the food basket counties, we have the National Cereals and Produce Board, NCPB. The infrastructure is existing. Is that an issue that anybody should be begged about? In my opinion, Mr. Speaker, sir, nobody needs to be begged for the obvious or to be reminded what needs to be done, Mr. Speaker, sir. Just a policy would dictate the behavior of even the state officers, the behavior of public officers towards actioning some of those policies. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is my plea that even as we support this motion, the whole House has supported this motion. I have not heard anybody who opposed this motion. Mr. Speaker, sir, it is my view that the issue of NCPB should not be discussed any further, but the responsible state actors, state officers who need to activate those grain storage and return the grain reserves must do so with much speed, because the expression that is in this House and that is in the National Assembly becomes the expression of the Kenyan people, begging and praying that even as we do importation of any maize, our farmers reserve the priority to give their grains, and their grains must be purchased and put in the reserve and used to feed the Kenyan people. Mr. Speaker, sir, I therefore rise to support this motion, and I say thank you to Senator Mofaya for making sure that Kenyan families can now be fed and that we can secure their nutritional interests within the counties right up to the household, Mr. Speaker, sir. We must be able as a nation to hold families accountable to equally contribute to this aspect of food security. Days are gone when people needed to look up to institutions and continually lay 110% burden on governments to act by its own self. But we would say, Mr. Speaker, sir, we call upon all the stakeholders, including the citizens, to take up responsibility, work together with the national government, work together with the county governments, and ensure that food security becomes the responsibility of everybody within the means that they can afford to make themselves food secure and to make sure that our children and our people have the nutritional value of the food that they need. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Honorable Veronica. The Honorable Senator Okoiti Andrew Omtata.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I thank you for the opportunity to rise and support this motion by my good friend, Senator Mofaya. Food security is a matter of choice. We can either choose to be food secure or we can choose to be food insecure. And the leadership of this country has chosen that this country should be food insecure. Right from independence, we took over a country that had been designed for food security from the colonial past. You will realize we had institutions like the ADC, with the research institutions for food and whatever, but the political elite, including some who are still in power today, were instrumental in stealing or dismantling these institutions. A lot of ADC land was stolen. A lot of other lands dedicated to research in agriculture and livestock was stolen. And then we ended up going back to peasant farming. To rub the salt in, the IMF came up with the SAPs, the Structural Adjustment Programs, whereby it forced this country to stop employing agricultural extension officers, to stop employing veterinary officers, and basically consigning our agriculture, which, as the senator who has just spoken before me, the Honorable Maina, has said that poverty is a key driver in the complexities that define our food security. So if people are poor and are expected to hire a veterinary officer, they are expected to hire an agricultural extension officer, they will not be able to deliver. So in supporting this motion, I also urge that among the things that should be done, a conscious effort by government must be taken to restore the agricultural extension officers and the veterinary officers so that farmers, those who produce, can be guided on the scientific ways of production. Another area where cartels or these fellows who, after they stole the land, have come to dismantle this country, recently as last year, we had a very, very successful Strategic Food Reserve Fund Trust Board, led by the Honorable Noah Wekesa, Dr. Noah Wekesa. It was able to stabilize the price of food. It was able to buy maize from farmers at a very good prices. And then it was targeted and dismantled. The money it was holding on disappeared. And they were then forced. And then the cartels came in and began playing games with us. It will be prudent that among the motions we need, within this motion, maybe we need to have some input about what happened with the Strategic Food Reserve Trust Fund. Of course, then you have got the perennial sinkhole called the National Cereals and Produce Board. These are the organs that have undermined our capacity to be food secure. Another thing, there has been a an introduction of GMOs, the debate on GMOs has been crafted onto this motion by various speakers. And it has been done in a manner that was very emotional. I would just urge that matters science should be left to the scientists, and I think Kenya doesn't have a shortage of them. We should be led by scientists on the question of GMOs. I've had like from yesterday, I had very strange statements being made on the floor of this house that hybrids and crafted plants equal to GMOs. Very simple literature, and the little that I know is that a hybrid is gene selection. A GMOs, as the name says, is gene modification. Gene modification either by editing the genes or by introducing new genes into organisms. And as that goes, as one would say, is that is playing God with organisms. And so it's an area that I would say maybe we are ill-equipped to debate and arrive at any findings that have merit. So I urge that if GMOs are going to be debated as an aspect of food security, then the debate must be informed, not just emotional. And the information must come from scientists whom we don't have a shortage of, not from politicians campaigning for or against a position. It will not help us. We know there was a task force on GMOs that was established. It rendered a report which has never been published officially, although I have seen some of it circulating online. And it was given as a basis for which GMOs were banned in this country. And so if GMOs are being defined as being equal to food security, then let us give that debate to people who understand it. But from where I sit, this country has not exhausted its potential to be food secure. When you look at the motion moved by the Honorable Mofaya, it shows you that there's a lot that can be done in this country to improve our capacity to produce and feed to produce food and feed ourselves. And also to protect our farmers. And there's a reason for protecting our farmers, that this country, farming is a major employer. We could as well just open the floodgates and say, we can get the cheapest maize in Brazil, GMO or not GMO, and bring it here and consume it. But then what happens to our farmers in an economy that's largely a peasant economy? So protection of the farmer is very important, but as we protect that farmer, we must enable them to produce efficiently so that they can compete. And that's why I go back and urge that whatever we do, extension officers, agricultural extension officers, and veterinary officers must be put back on the payroll of government. And now that agriculture has devolved, we must enhance the amount of money that goes to the counties to cater for these critical agents of production in the food chain. Even the environment is heavily dependent on them. You saw the other day, you are told about the crossing over of diseases from animals to human beings. We need veterinary officers who can, as a front line, against an eventuality like that. With all these mutating genes and stuff. So, it's my submission that over and above what has been ably presented by the mover of the motion and the various honorable members who have supported that motion, this House, as the custodian of devolution under which agriculture is, must take the question of agriculture seriously, and we must go the scientific way, and the scientific way is getting back into the field agricultural extension officers and veterinary officers. Our people cannot afford to pay for these services, and that's why there's a lot of poor production and failure in our agricultural and livestock enterprises. With those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, sir, I support the motion by the Honorable Mofaya, Senator of where we have very many people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Okoiti Omtata. The Honorable Senator Okenyuri Esther Anyeni.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also rise to support the mover of this motion, the good senator for Tharaka Nithi, Senator Mofaya. And I would love to comment by saying that the issue of food security is a very pressing issue currently. And the drought that we are witnessing has not just affected the ASAL areas, but in areas like Kisii and Nyamira, where I come from, the rivers that we initially had with water are drying up. The women no longer go to the rivers because there's nothing to carry back home. That's how sad it is. Women are having to regulate their modes of eating so that they can leave some food for their children. Young people no longer have anything to even support themselves with. And when you look at this issue, that tells you if young people and women currently are the most hit, and looking at the UN's projections of young people in Kenya having the largest population in the coming 10 years, that's something that should worry us as representatives of ordinary people in this House. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, I want to also indicate that issues of drought, climate change is quite an issue that goes together. And with this, I would love to support the head of state's call of action to we planting trees. As a House, apart from legislating, we should take an initiative to educate the population on the importance of planting trees. In India, I don't know if I'll be jumping ahead of what is to be brought to this House. I saw a motion that is yet to be introduced by Senator Kajwang on incorporating climate change education in the school curriculum. In reference to that coming motion, I would want to also mention that in India, in school, children have been brought up planting trees in school, and when they go home, they go with seedlings. So it's a culture that has been brought up to them, so people grow knowing it's a responsibility to plant trees, and in doing so, you're protecting the environment. People can breathe clean air, so people can remain healthy, and we can alienate illnesses that are related to climate change issues. Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, I also want to say this food security needs to be addressed, because when you look at our good friends from Rift Valley, the drought that we are witnessing has affected even the athletes due to heat-related illnesses. So they are performing poorly, and also that means they are not able to make a living out of
what they do running, and therefore as a country we are losing on that end. And when you look at the Sustainable Development Goal number 2 of addressing hunger and making people food secure, I think we are yet to achieve that, and as a house, we need to support initiatives by this government to fight the issue of drought and support people be food secure. Lastly, I see a lot of emphasis being put on the drought mitigation measures to ASAL counties. I think it should just be ASAL counties. Like I've mentioned, areas like Kisii, Nyamira are witnessing droughts, and farmers who are even growing coffee and producing 15,000 kilograms of coffee beans are now producing 3,000 kilograms of coffee beans. That means they're producing those amounts at the current cost of inputs they have. So I'm really looking forward to the Kenya Kwanza plan that we were largely campaigning on before our election, subsidizing the costs of production so that women, young people are able to support themselves, especially rural women and young people. So finally, Mr. Speaker, this is a good conversation, and apart from just talking about it, we now need to legislate, especially in the different counties. For my case, like Kisii, we need to protect the water areas so that away from areas like the ASAL areas, there are those areas which have been affected by people going into those water areas and encroaching. So I want to support Senator Mofaya bringing this motion to this House and reminding us that really as a House and as Kenyans, we have an opportunity to change the narrative that we keep talking about effects of climate change and support the move to planting trees across the country. I read somewhere that in Saudi Arabia, in Dubai, they are planning to plant 2 billion trees. That's a big challenge to Kenya because I don't think we can be compared to that country. We have the favor of Mother Nature, in as much as it's behaving badly currently, but we have a responsibility to protect it. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I also rise to support this motion and tell the Senator for Tharaka Nithi that this is a step in the right direction. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Okinyuri. The Honorable Senator Seki Lenku Olekanar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support this motion from Honorable Senator Mofaya on the issue of food security, which really has affected this country quite a lot, and I want to support this motion by introducing a few issues which really, if we look at it carefully as this Senate and as a country, we will definitely come in to secure this country, because a country without that will not be able to feed its people, then we don't have a country. I want to say that if really these issues are taken care of, we observe them carefully, we will be able to hand over or even to have a country that can feed its people, and even people and citizens are happy of its own country. And we'll be able to, will be comfortable to be in this country. Most importantly, I want to say that if in this time now, we have new county governments where we have new governors coming in, new counties, new administrations, and most of the things that are happening now in Kenya, particularly in our counties, we have counties planning their own.
by introducing county integrated development plans, which now will give them to understand more on what they are required to do in the next couple of years, 5 years. And this can give them an opportunity to plan themselves, plan their budgets well, introduce what they want, particularly in an introduction of such a motion like this, that we need to have counties and even government now coming in to introduce a way of a country to be food secure. It is very important. So I think it is the right time that the motion has been introduced. And I want to say that it is a time for us as a country, as county governments, to introduce a way of feeding our own people. We know that this time around it is a time where the drought has really affected so many counties, particularly the assaults and semi-arid counties. Mr. Speaker, sir, it is a chance that these counties should learn from the situation that has really affected our people. So for us, it is important that we introduce more and more in mechanism and even more strategic plans, so that at least by the end of this financial year, we are able to put in the next 3 or 4 years good plans that can mitigate this issue of food security. I know very well that we have so many things that are affecting food security, environment, pollution of environment. Other things like, for example, in counties that I am, like in Kajiado, where I'm coming from, Kajiado, in fact, things like subdivision of land has also been a big problem, because people are subdividing land, they don't have a place to cultivate, there's no place to do farming. So I think these are the kind of things county governments should come in and see how they can protect the farmer from the onset. Otherwise, I want to say that we support this brilliant idea from Mheshimiwa Mofaya, and we want to support going forward that we will see much more improvement of this motion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I stand to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Senator Seki, for your contribution. Members, I noticed that there are no more members who are seeking to give further support to the motion, and I now call upon the mover of the motion, Honorable Senator Mofaya, to reply. Senator Mofaya.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I am extremely happy because of the rich contributions that have emanated from my fellow senators. Honorable Speaker, I'm too passionate about food security in Kenya. Having grown up from an humble background, I remember, Honorable Speaker, at the age of 10, I was already looking for personal food, even to feed my own parents. And this, Honorable Speaker, is something that has lived with me for long, and I find it very painful when I see people dying across the country, 60 years down the line. This country has suffered for lack of proper policies. We have seen people die. We have seen children get out of school because of lack of food. We have seen animals die. We have seen people trek long distances in search of water and food for that matter. And it is that time, Honorable Speaker, this country gets serious. Because, Honorable Speaker, 60 years down the line, we are still talking the same language of food security. We have under droughts, year in, year out. I remember the first drought that I can remember when I was, I think I was about 8 years old, was a drought of 1976, where people really suffered and people died animals. There were nothing done, no mitigation for that matter. Then there was the drought of 1984. People really suffered a lot across the board, especially the ISO areas. And coincidentally, Honorable Speaker, away from some misconception that maybe some of us come from Mount Kenya, some parts, especially where I come from, is an ISO area. So we are subjected to a lot of problems. So we have seen these things, Honorable Speaker, and it is the high time that the government puts in place some very strong policies, like the one that I've highlighted. So we need a serious coordination between the national and the county government, at least to create some more funding, especially to ISO areas. Recently, Honorable Speaker, we have seen livestock die across the board. In Maasai, you would even buy a cow at 1,000 shillings. In Mandela, in Wajir, you would buy a goat. There's one farmer, livestock farmer, who confessed that he was selling his goats at 100 shillings. You know, Honorable Speaker, what we lack in this country is some serious programs and serious policies. And Honorable Speaker, I've had some confessions, even some people have nowhere even to take their maize, where others are dying in the same country. We have people who have a lot of potatoes, like in Nyandalua, where Mr. Honorable Medu comes from, right? Just in the neighboring county, like Kipia, people are dying of hunger. So I think we need to harmonize some of these policies so that we can have a one united country where we have some serious strategies, where we have serious policies, where we have some discipline on what we do as a Senate. Because I'm speaking, there would be out of waste of time that we come here, we talk, we do a lot of talking and all these things, and then these things are not implemented. So, Honorable Speaker, I sincerely want to thank my fellow senators for giving this motion the very best attention, the very best consideration, because, Honorable Speaker, the contributions that I've done in this House have seriously enriched this motion, and along the way, Honorable Speaker, we are going to develop a bill which is going to compel the government to put in place some serious policies, serious strategies to address these underlying problems that we have had for quite some time. So, Honorable Speaker, I wish to say thank you very much for the entire membership of this House, for having seen it wise, for having seen it in pride to support this motion. And I'm very sure that I think along the way, Honorable Speaker, we are supposed to introduce to amend a standing order so that we can have an implementation committee which is supposed to oversee that some of the things that we do in this House are implemented, maybe by the relevant committees or the relevant government organs. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Thank you very much, the Honorable Senator Mofaya. Honorable members, pursuant to Standing Order 84-2, I make a determination that this matter, a subject of this motion, does not affect counties, and therefore, Honorable Senators, I put the question that aware Article 43 of the Constitution of Kenya 2010 stipulates the rights of every person to be free from hunger, to have adequate food of acceptable quality, and to clean and save water in adequate quantities. Further aware that there is a prevailing food shortage in Kenya, which is as a result of, among other factors, lack of an inadequate rainfall over the last 2 years, the consistent decline in the number of farmers and lands committed to farming, and the Russia-Ukraine war that has led to an increased cost of fertilizer and fuel products, which are critical farm inputs, subjecting over 4.1 million Kenyans in the arid and semi-arid lands to an acute food insecure situation, and about 942,500 children under 5 years and 134,270 pregnant and lactating mothers to acute malnutrition, according to the Kenya Food Security Steering Group, KFSSG report. Noting that about 1.5 million deaths of livestock have so far been reported in the arid and semi-arid lands, and that the situation is expected to be dire in light of expert projections that we may miss the normal cycle of rain expected in October, November and December 2022, and that this could be the worst drought we have experienced in 40 years. Concern that the country is recording incidences of conflict between crop farmers and pastoralists over the scarce resource of water and pasture, which results in the destruction of crops and deaths of livestock, further exacerbating the food crisis, and that the challenge of food shortage is now spreading to areas previously presumed to be rain-rich, such as Mount Kenya, whose residents are now relying on government emergency food supplies. Now, therefore, the Senate urges the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock Development to develop the targeted policy programs aimed at addressing the food insecurity in the country, including the following. 1. Coordinate with county governments to establish strategic grain reserve across the country, with drought-stricken areas receiving priority. 2. Develop livestock feeding programs in ASAL regions, providing water and feeds to the livestock farmers. 3. Coordinate with the National Drought Management Authority to do quarterly reports to the Senate on the drought situation in the country. 4. Subsidize agricultural production. And 5. Establish abattoirs in ASAL counties, and further recommends that the National Treasury and Economic Planning increases funding to the National Drought Disaster Fund. Now, honorable senators, will as many as are of that opinion say aye? Aye. Will as many as are of a contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it. Next order.
Order number 9, motion, integrating climate education into national education curriculum.
Seems the Honorable Senator Kajwang is not in the House. Let's defer that to the next session. Next order.
Order number 10, motion, plight of Kenyan domestic workers in the Middle East.
Senator Veronica, the mover of the motion.
Mr. Speaker, sir, thank you for this opportunity to move this motion on the plight of Kenyan domestic workers in the Middle East. And I beg to move the motion that aware that foreign workers from developing countries make up a large majority of the Gulf's labor, a trend driven in Kenya by the high rate of youth unemployment, which stands at 34.21%, forcing young Kenyans to continue to go beyond our borders in pursuit of lucrative employment opportunities. Further aware that the kafala or sponsorship system found in the Gulf Cooperation Council, countries such as Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, and Lebanon, defines the relationship between foreign workers and their local sponsors, under which the state gives local individuals or companies sponsorships, permits to employ foreign laborers and cover travel expenses, and provides housing in the case of domestic workers in the sponsor's home. Appreciating that the Kenyan recruitment process of domestic workers for Saudi Arabia involves a number of stakeholders, including the Saudi employers, the Saudi Arabian employment agencies, Ministry of Labor, Labor Department, National Employment Authority, NEA, the National Industrial Training Authority, NITA, prospective domestic workers, the Kenya private employment agencies, in Saudi Arabian Embassy and the Immigration Department, noting that numerous Kenyan migrant domestic workers in Saudi Arabia have documented various forms of abuses, including passport confiscation, physical abuse, sexual abuse, sleep deprivation, food deprivation, labor exploitation, imprisonment prior to deportation, religious intolerance, and psychological abuse, leading to some of these workers losing their lives. cognizant that Article 10, 11, and 14 of the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of their Families, adopted on the 18th December 1990, espouses that no migrant worker shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment, shall be held in slavery or servitude, or be subjected to arbitrary or unlawful interference with his or her privacy, family, correspondence, or other communication, or to unlawful attacks on his or her honor and reputation, and the right to the protection of the law against such interference of attacks. Further appreciating that staffing shortages and inadequate funding faced by the labor attaches in Saudi Arabia hinder the effective supervision of migrant workers in distress, lack of safe houses, lack of a comprehensive mechanism to handle labor disputes, and a lack of a legal framework defining the roles of migrant workers in order to adhere to the terms of their contracts are some of the challenges that need to be overcome. Concerned that under the bilateral labor agreement between the government of Kenya and the government of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia on the recruitment of domestic workers that was developed and adopted in January 2016, Kenya was obligated to provide qualified and medically fit workers needed by Saudi Arabia according to the job specification. And in turn, Saudi Arabia was obligated to ensure that the welfare and the rights of employers and domestic workers employed in the kingdom are promoted and protected in accordance with the applicable rules and regulations, which has not been the case, including the enforcement of rest hours and the identity and work permits remaining in the possession of the migrant workers. Now, therefore, the Senate resolves that the Ministries of Interior and National Administration, Labor and Social Protection, Foreign Affairs and Diaspora Affairs, Immigration Department, the National Employment Authority, the Kenya Private Employment Agencies, cease all travel by Kenyan migrant workers to the Gulf states with immediate effect until, 1, the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection amends the National Labor Migration Regulatory Framework Policy to address labor exploitation management. 2, the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Diaspora Affairs adopt and ratify the multilateral declaration relating to the protection of workers, such as the International Labor Organization, Domestic Workers Convention 2011, number 189, and the Private Employment Agencies Convention 1997, number 181, the establishment of functional overseas labor offices for the administration and enforcement of the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection policies for migrant workers. 4, a review of the bilateral agreement between the Government of Kenya and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Diaspora Affairs to adequately address identified gaps and emerging issues. 5, there are established safe houses to serve a central heart of welfare and assistance to migrant workers and temporary shelters for overseas Kenyans in distress. And 6, any Kenyan in distress, and in particular Helen Kemunto, is rescued and brought back to Kenya from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Mr. Speaker, sir, that covers the content of the motion that I present before the House today. And Mr. Speaker, sir, one of the key things to note is that in Kenya, the problem of youth unemployment has steadily worsened over the years, just like in many other parts of the world. And the crisis has assumed very high proportions in the wake of the current global economic recession. Mr. Speaker, sir, our population has a youth bulge. Over 60% of the youth remain unemployed. And this youth bulge must and should become a driver of economic growth. Now, economic growth can only be sustained by policy predictability that can enable long-term commitments And Mr. Speaker, sir, when I talk about predictability, then it means that if any employee is to enter into any contractual obligation with an employer, there has to be predictability. And Mr. Speaker, sir, we are not blind to the fact that the Labor Ministry has reported that maybe over 400,000 Kenyan migrant workers have been positioned in the Gulf region, with approximately 210,000 of those workers being in Saudi Arabia. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, sir, we are also not blind to the fact that Saudi Arabia is the third highest source of remittance inflows from diaspora that works outside Kenya. That follows after the US and the UK. So indeed, Mr. Speaker, sir, nobody can doubt or should even doubt or question why this is an important source of earning income for the nation, and also why employment outside Kenya is also important for our nation as an income earner, and also the need for the youth to seek employment beyond our borders. In fact, Mr. Speaker, sir, the youth sometimes are so desperate that they will seek for these opportunities at whatever expense. More often than not, Mr. Speaker, sir, at the point when these youths are seeking for employment outside Kenya, they actually almost don't care what is going to happen to them until, Mr. Speaker, sir, they are in a destination like Saudi Arabia, and the worst turns, the contract turns into the worst form of human rights violations, egregious violations, Mr. Speaker, sir, that cannot even be spoken about. Mr. Speaker, sir, I have in mind a lady by the name Faith Murunga, who left Saudi Arabia with obvious scars and burns, permanent scars, that you remind her of her days that she worked within the Saudi Arabia, Mr. Speaker, sir, very prominent scars, because her employer threw a whole kettle of boiling water to her in the course of supposedly giving her instruction for that work. Mr. Speaker, sir, while it may be important for the youths to seek this form of employment from outside the nation of Kenya and in jurisdiction like Saudi Arabia, I am certain, Mr. Speaker, sir, that these workers never signed up to go and face the forms of abuses that they face within the Saudi Arabia. And Mr. Speaker, sir, the kind of negotiations that may have been done or have not been done between the government of Kenya and the government of Saudi, the moment is now ripe for those negotiations to be done, Mr. Speaker, sir. And as those negotiations are being done, bilaterals, agreements that will be foment the relationship between the two nations, Mr. Speaker, sir, it behoves on the actors and the ministries that are concerned and the ministers that are concerned to cease movement until the workers, migrant workers from Kenya, are no longer facing the sort of abuse that they have been exposed to from the time, Mr. Speaker, sir, they were sent to Saudi Arabia. Mr. Speaker, sir, I note that the Philippines, the country of Philippines, in 2021, suspended deployment of workers to Saudi Arabia because of the nature of the environment that their workers were facing in Saudi Arabia. That was suspended until October this year, Mr. Speaker, sir. And what does that say, Mr. Speaker, sir? That tangible action can be taken by Kenya in terms of defining the terms of the relationship that must be had, Mr. Speaker, sir, between the employer and the employee before the employer leaves the nation of Kenya. Mr. Speaker, sir, the violation of the workers' rights has drastically worsened with time, with increased death and distress cases, warranting very firm and decisive action to curb any further suffering of the Kenyan domestic workers in Saudi Arabia. Mr. Speaker, sir, I'm alive to the fact that if you look at the earnings that Kenya had from Saudi Arabia last year, it could be in excess of 184 million USD dollars. And Mr. Speaker, sir, the question one must ask himself or herself is, who are these agencies, Mr. Speaker, sir, who are running this business blind and not interested in the rights and the welfare of the people they are trading over their heads, Mr. Speaker, sir? The National Employment Authority, Mr. Speaker, sir, is mandated to license the agencies that have been appropriating these workers and shipping them to Saudi Arabia, Mr. Speaker, sir. We need to know, Mr. Speaker, sir, who are these agencies? What is the register of the agencies? Who are the proprietors of these agencies? Why has this issue arisen now and again and does not have a solution, Mr. Speaker, sir? Who is being protected here, Mr. Speaker, sir? What is the quality of the workforce that is being sent to Saudi Arabia, Mr. Speaker, sir? I have listened to some of the justifications that have been returned or given to Kenyans as an explanation, which I deem as very flimsy, Mr. Speaker, sir. That in some of those explanations, they said that the girls who were sent to Saudi Arabia were not schooled enough, did not understand a modern house, do not know how the operations of a modern home works, and that when they went there, Mr. Speaker, sir, that they were not polite enough or bending enough to please the employers, Mr. Speaker, sir. Nothing could be as insulting or as abusive to the Kenyan community. The Kenyan community is made up of people who are respectful, who are friendly, Mr. Speaker, sir. And it is not possible that that can be used to justify a grievous abuse of human rights, Mr. Speaker, sir. As I present this motion before this House, Mr. Speaker, sir, I want to say tangible action needs to be taken, Mr. Speaker, sir. I have made proposals to this, proposals in this motion, Mr. Speaker, sir, and I want now to invite Senator Methu to second this motion, ready for debate in this House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Honorable Senator John Methu.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise to second the motion by the distinguished Senator Veronica Maina, the Secretary General of the ruling party, on the plight of Kenya domestic workers in the Middle East. I am sure because I've spoken to her, there was some small typo in the printing of the motion. I know we shall get advice from the office, but nevertheless, this is a well thought out motion. We would not want to belabor the plight of domestic workers in the Gulf countries. Every day, you get a family that is crying out of, and by the way, as she has rightly put it, we do not intend to say that we do not, there are no benefits that we are getting out of exporting labor to the Gulf countries. Unemployment in our country has gone very high, and when our people get greener pastures elsewhere, that is something that we really encourage. According to the Central Bank of Kenya, the Gulf countries are the third largest remitters of foreign currency, which in essence means that they are a major source of employment for the people of Kenya. And that said, we cannot also close our eyes
to the major issues that are facing the people, be it the young people who are working at the Gulf countries. I am seized of a case, Mr. Speaker, of a young girl called Peris Mugure from a small village called Mutembei in Nyandarua. Peris Mugure left Kenya for Saudi in 2019 for a 2-year contract. According to his brother, Mr. Wainaina, everything worked very well. She was remitting her dues up to until in May of 2022, when they lost contact on their sister. They became very worried. They tried to access and get to know where their sister is, to no avail. They, thanks to the era of the social media, they raised a Facebook post. And Mr. Speaker, it is at that point that they knew that their daughter, Peris Mugure, is in the deportation unit in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, in very, very bad shape. They were almost not able to recognize her. And to this minute, they have not been able to have her back home. That is one case in very, very many cases that we get every day. You see them in the news, you see them in the social media. Just the other day, the CS was receiving a case that was in the social media. Very many people. Those are just isolated cases out of the very many cases that we have found ourselves in. And so this motion is very timely. According to the Amnesty International records, majority of the workers at the Gulf countries complain majorly on issues on forced labor, physical abuse. The mover of the motion has just given a case of a person who suffered serious burns and has scars that remain to this minute. There are issues on rape, dangerous working conditions. And Mr. Speaker, if we do not rise to address these issues, the fact that the Gulf countries are the third biggest contributors who overshadow the wrongs that are coming out of the whole arrangement. The current sponsorship system that is being used by the government of Saudi Arabia, that individuals are given an opportunity, they are given permits to get cheap labor for the other people. Some people are abusing that privilege of getting that cheap labor, and so from our side we must try and address. Of the many resolutions that have been sought by this motion, Mr. Speaker, and by the way, despite the fact that Philippines was one of the countries that exported a lot of labor to Saudi Arabia, they suspended deployment of their workers to Saudi Arabia in 2019. There must have been a reason to it. It cannot be that they just woke up one day and decided to stop exportation of labor to Saudi Arabia. Of the many resolutions that have been sought by this motion, one thing that we must address with almost immediate effect is establishment of a functional overseas labor office, so that the people who are working at those Gulf countries, they will get a point of getting a place that they can be able to report, so that we sort out this issue of dispute resolution, that if you are in Saudi Arabia and you have engaged yourself, or you are in a major dispute with your employer, and your contract is still running, they will not mistreat you. You get a labor office that deals with the matters of Kenya, and that matter will be sorted out. so that you're able to continue to see your contract through, or your contract is terminated and you come back home. Because, Mr. Speaker, you imagine that once you sign a contract, however harsh the working conditions are, you have to work through the contract. You have to, I'm told there are those that get 1 meal in 2 days. If you find yourself working for a family that gives you 1 meal in 2 days, and you have signed a 2-year contract, you have to work at that home for 2 years. This is an injustice that must be sorted out, Mr. Speaker. And the way to sort this one out is to have a functional, not just a labor office, a functional labor office that will be dealing with and so the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection should move the speed so that as we talk of creating employment, we do not create employment and we are not able to protect employment. Mr. Speaker, we also need to, as it has been proposed, amend the National Labor Migration Regulatory Framework because we need to export, we need to manage how we export our labor so that a person does not wake up one day, they do a deal with a person that is in Qatar, in Saudi, and then they deal with, they do a matter, in an underhand way, and they export our children to Saudi. And once they get there, it is not as rosy as they are promised. Mr. Speaker, we need to hasten and bolster our relationship with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because we do not intend, as I said, we do not intend to break away. That is why I had a small issue with the typing of the word with immediate effect, so that this matter will be smooth. We do not intend to severe. We do not intend to severe. Okay, all right, Mr. Speaker. We do not intend to severe our working relationships with the government of or with the government of the United Kingdom. I would not want to take more time than that. I wish to second the motion.
Thank you, Honorable Senator Medu. Honorable Senators, I now propose the question. Aware that foreign workers from developing countries make up a large majority of the Gulf labor trend, driven in Kenya by the high rate of youth unemployment, which stands at 34.21%, forcing young Kenyans to continue to go beyond our borders in pursuit of lucrative employment opportunities. Further, aware that the kafala or sponsorship system found in the Gulf Cooperation Council, countries such as Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, and Lebanon, defines the relationship between foreign workers and their local sponsor, under which the state gives local individuals or companies sponsorship permits to employ foreign laborers and covers travel expenses and provides housing in the case of domestic workers in the sponsor's home. Appreciating that the Kenyan recruitment process of domestic workers for Saudi Arabia involves a number of stakeholders, including the Saudi employers, the Saudi Arabia employment agencies, Ministry of Labor and the Labor Department, National Employment Authority, National Industrial Training Authority, prospective domestic workers, Kenya Private Employment Agencies, Saudi Arabian Embassy, and the Immigration Department, noting that numerous Kenyans migrants, domestic workers in Saudi Arabia have documented various forms of abuses, including passport confiscation, physical abuse, sexual abuse, sleep deprivation, food deprivation, labor exploitation, imprisonment prior to deportation, religious intolerance, and psychological abuse, leading to some of these workers losing their lives. Cognizant that Articles 10, 11, and 14 of the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of all Migrant Workers and Members of their Families, adopted on the 18th of December 1990, exposes that no migrant worker shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment, shall be held in slavery or servitude, or be subjected to arbitrary or unlawful interference with his or her privacy, family, correspondence, or other communications, or to unlawful attacks on his or her honor and reputation. and the right to the protection of the law against such interference or attacks. Further, appreciating that staffing shortages and inadequate funding faced by the labor attaches in Saudi Arabia hinder the effective supervision of migrant workers in distress, lack of safe houses, lack of a comprehensive mechanism to handle labor disputes, and a lack of a legal framework defining the roles of migrant workers in order to adhere to the terms of their contracts, are some of the challenges that need to be overcome. Concerned that under the bilateral labor agreement between the government of Kenya and the government of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia on the recruitment of domestic workers that was developed and adopted in January 2016, Kenya was obligated to provide qualified and medically fit workers needed by Saudi Arabia according to the job specifications, and in turn, Saudi Arabia was obligated to ensure that the welfare and rights of employers and domestic workers employed in the kingdom are promoted and protected in accordance with the applicable rules and regulations, which has not been the case, including the enforcement of rest hours and identity and work permits remaining in the possession of the migrant worker. Now, therefore, the Senate resolves that the Ministries of Interior and National Administration, Labor and Social Protection, Foreign Affairs and Diaspora Affairs, Migration Department, the National Employment Authority, the National Industrial Training Authority, and the Kenya Private Employment Agencies cease all travel by Kenyan migrant workers to the Gulf states with immediate effect until 1. The Ministry of Labor and Social Protection amends the National Labor Migration Regulatory Framework Policy to address labor exploitation management. 2. The Ministry of Labor and Social Protection and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Diaspora Affairs adopt and ratify the multilateral declarations relating to the protection of workers, such as the International Labor Organization, Domestic Workers Convention 2011, and the Private Employment Agencies Convention 1997. 3. The establishment of functional overseas labor office for the administration and enforcement of the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection policies for migrant workers. 4. A review of the bilateral agreement between the government of Kenya and the Kingdom of the Saudi Arabia by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Diaspora Affairs to adequately address identified gaps and emerging issues. 5. There are established safe houses to serve as central hearts of welfare and assistance to migrant workers and temporary shelters for overseas Kenyans in distress. And 6. Any Kenyan in distress, and in particular Helen Kemunto, is rescued and brought back to Kenya from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Honorable members, it is now 6:31, time to adjourn the House. We shall resume debate on this motion tomorrow. The Senate therefore stands adjourned until tomorrow, Thursday, 24th November 2022 at 2:30 p.m.
Because they hear that Kenya have a fund called CDF. Lastly, before we went to elections, I saw Uganda were here, members of parliament from Uganda, to come and to learn, to see how CDF is utilized.